Cast your mind back to Britain during the First Wizarding War. On the night of 31 October 1981, Lord Voldemort entered the hidden home of James and Lily Potter in Godric's Hollow. Before dawn, the war that had darkened Britain for years had fallen quiet, and an infant named Harry Potter was carried away from the ruins. London, in 1926, lies beneath a wet winter sky as Tom Marvolo Riddle enters the world in a quiet room far from the houses of wizarding Britain. Rain moves softly against the windows, though the child is not born in Little Hangleton, and the city's distant lamps tremble upon the black glass. Beyond the orphanage, streets shine beneath the evening drizzle. Coal smoke hangs over roofs and chimney pots. A nurse carries the infant through a corridor where footsteps fade beneath muted voices. No one in that room can see the shape of his future. His name is Tom Marvolo Riddle, and the established chronology of the novels places his birth on the last day of 1926. The date rests quietly in the dark, beside the ticking of a clock and the low breathing of other children. Outside, winter gathers over Britain. Inside, the boy sleeps beneath a thin blanket while the first hours of a long shadow pass almost unnoticed. Years later, you are standing in the orphanage corridor where Tom Riddle grows from a silent child into a schoolboy who watches everything. The walls are pale and worn, carrying the faint odor of boiled vegetables, damp wool and soap. Rain touches the windows in a fine, patient pattern. Somewhere beyond the glass, a tram bell sounds and disappears into the wet streets. The other children speak in little clusters, their voices low when Tom passes nearby. He is handsome, narrow-faced, and unusually composed. His eyes remain attentive. His hands are still. A toy left upon a table seems less interesting to him than the person who has placed it there. You feel the chill beneath the floorboards and hear a distant door closing. The orphanage is a place of ordinary rules, but Tom Riddle studies those rules as though they were weaknesses waiting to be measured. At the age when other children are learning the limits of kindness, Tom discovers that fear can be used more quietly than kindness. You're walking behind him through a narrow passage where afternoon light rests in grey strips upon the floor. A caretaker's shoes move heavily at the far end. Dust drifts in the beam near the window. The air smells of rainwater and old wood. Tom does not hurry. He knows which cupboards are left unlocked, which children will be believed, and which rooms remain empty after supper. Around him, the orphanage settles into its evening sounds. A kettle trembles upon a stove. A chair scrapes against stone. Behind a closed door, two adults speak in muted voices. The words cannot be heard clearly, yet Tom seems to understand the authority carried by silence. The rain continues beyond the windows, washing the streets without changing them. In 1938, Tom Riddle leaves the orphanage for Hogwarts, carrying little luggage and an expression that gives almost nothing away. You are at King's Cross beneath the great iron roof, where steam thickens the air and porters call softly among the passengers. Winter light falls through the high windows. Suitcases knock against one another. Owl wings beat through the cold air as cages shift upon luggage trolleys, and the smell of coal smoke clings to coats and scarves. Then the station gives way to a hidden platform and a waiting train. You cross into a world of red seats, dark glass, and enchanted distance. The countryside slides past in rain-grey fields. By evening, the towers of Hogwarts rise above the black water of the lake. You feel the cold stone beneath your shoes when the great doors open, and you hear hundreds of voices gathering beyond them. The Sorting Hat places Tom Riddle in Slytherin, among students who value ancestry, ambition, and the careful preservation of secrets. You stand beneath the floating candles, while the hall glows with gold above the long tables. Rain beads upon the tall windows. The ceiling shows a troubled sky. At the Slytherin table, green light from the enchanted banners rests upon silver goblets and polished cutlery. Older pupils lean together, their voices reduced to whispers, as the new boy takes his seat. Tom looks towards the teacher's table. Albus Dumbledore teaches Transfiguration at Hogwarts when Riddle is a pupil, and his watchful eyes are already difficult to evade. The castle breathes around you through distant staircases and unseen passages. Cold stone lies beneath the rushes. Somewhere high above, an owl crosses the winter darkness, its wings beating steadily through the air. Hogwarts offers Tom Riddle knowledge, but the school also offers him an ancient building full of concealed doors, abandoned chambers, and histories buried beneath the present. You are moving through corridors after sunset, with the last lamps burning low against the stone. The walls are cold beneath your fingertips. Suits of armor hold their silent poses. A draft slips under a doorway and carries the smell of rain from the grounds. Portraits murmur behind their frames, pausing whenever Tom approaches. He knows that the castle is older than the teachers who explain it, and he senses that certain secrets have survived because no one has searched for them properly. The sound of footsteps travels a long way here. A closing door may belong to a servant, a prefect, or a presence that has no business moving through the school at night. Each corridor seems to offer another possibility. During the 1940, Tom Riddle investigates his ancestry and learns that Salazar Slytherin is among his ancestors. You are seated in a dim room beneath a green-shaded lamp while old names gather across parchment. The paper smells faintly of dust and sealing wax. Rain taps against a distant window, and the fire has fallen into a bed of red coals. Tom follows records through forgotten branches of family history, tracing marriages, disappearances, and inherited claims. The discovery gives him more than pride. It gives him a story in which power appears to belong to him by right. Salazar Slytherin, one of the founders of Hogwarts, becomes not merely a name from a history lesson, but a supposed ancestor concealed within his own bloodline. The idea settles into him slowly. It deepens his patience and gives his ambition the weight of tradition. The familiar corridors of Hogwarts become the setting for Tom Riddle's early experiments with power, including the opening of the Chamber of Secrets. You are beneath the school, where the air is colder and the walls glisten with moisture. Water moves somewhere behind the stone. A serpent carved into an ancient surface seems to watch the passage with blank, patient eyes. Tom has learned to speak Parseltongue, the language associated with Salazar Slytherin, and the sealed entrance yields to his command. The chamber opens in darkness. Its hidden spaces contain the remains of an older hatred, preserved beneath the school like a coal beneath ash. The basilisk moves through the passages while pupils continue their lessons above. Doors close in the castle. Footsteps pass. No alarm yet reaches the teachers. The stones hold the secret for a little longer. In the story, the Chamber of Secrets leads to the death of Myrtle Warren, a pupil whose school life ends in a hidden place at Hogwarts. You are standing near a bathroom where the lamps cast a weak reflection upon wet tiles. Pipes murmur inside the walls. The cold stone seems to draw sound away from the room, leaving only a faint echo of dripping water. Myrtle Warren has been found dead, and the school's unease moves from classroom to classroom. Cloaks brush past. Teachers speak behind closed doors. Students lower their voices at the end of corridors. Outside, rain darkens the grounds, and coal smoke hangs above the village beyond the lake. Tom Riddle remains composed while fear spreads around him. He observes the confusion, the questions, and the sudden attention given to his carefully arranged account. The chamber is closed again, but its darkness remains beneath the floors. Hogwarts continues, as institutions often do, with lessons in the morning and guarded silence in the evening. You are crossing the entrance hall beneath high windows clouded by rain. Wet footprints mark the flagstones. A professor's robes pass at the edge of your vision. From a distant classroom comes the soft movement of books and the scrape of a quill. Students gather in small groups beside the staircases, speaking of Myrtle Warren and the danger hidden somewhere within the castle. The air tastes of dust and damp wool. A cold current moves through the doors whenever they open towards the grounds. Far above, an owl beats its wings through the winter air, carrying letters between families and the school. The ordinary sounds return, but they no longer feel entirely safe. Tom Riddle leaves Hogwarts with excellent marks, a polished manner, and a reputation that conceals more than it reveals. You are watching him depart beneath a pale morning sky while the castle towers fade into mist. The lake lies dark and still. Frost rests along the path. His trunk is packed neatly, and his uniform appears almost untouched by travel. Behind him, Hogwarts continues its ancient routines, holding its staircases, classrooms, and secrets. Ahead lies London, with its wet pavements, crowded shops, and soot-darkened windows. Tom carries the knowledge of his ancestry and the memory of the chamber. He also carries the conviction that his birth name is too ordinary for what he intends to become. The name Tom Marvolo Riddle can be rearranged into another name, one designed to sound less like a boy from an orphanage and more like a warning. After leaving Hogwarts, Riddle is said to have worked at Borgin and Burke's before disappearing from public view. You are inside the dark shop in Nocturne Alley, where objects of uncertain history rest behind dusty glass. A silver hand catches the lamplight. A cabinet gives a faint, unpleasant creak. The air holds metal, old leather, and the dry scent of neglected books. At Borgin and Burke's, Riddle studies valuable artifacts and the people who desire them. He learns how greed speaks politely. He learns which families hide their pride beneath formal manners. Outside, rain slicks the alley stones, and coal smoke drifts between the buildings. Then Tom Riddle vanishes from public view. His name appears less often. His movements become rumors. The shop remembers him, but Britain does not yet understand what he has been preparing. When he returns, he has adopted the name Lord Voldemort, derived from an anagram of his birth name. You are in a room where a single fire gives little warmth, and several people sit without speaking. The new name travels first through small circles, spoken cautiously by those who have heard it from someone else. Lord Voldemort. The syllables seem too deliberate to belong to an ordinary man. They carry the coldness of a title and the privacy of a threat. The old name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, remains hidden beneath the arrangement of letters, like a face beneath a mask. Outside, rain presses against the windows. In the distance, a door closes. No one raises a voice. The name is repeated once, then again, and each repetition makes the room feel narrower. By the 1970, Voldemort has gathered followers who call themselves Death Eaters, and private prejudice becomes an organized campaign. You are standing in a village street at dusk, while coal smoke settles above the chimneys. The lamps have just been lit. A shopkeeper lowers a blind. Somewhere nearby, a family draws curtains across a front room. The Death Eaters move through Britain in dark robes and masks, carrying the belief that wizards and witches from old magical families stand above muggles and muggle-born witches and wizards. Their doctrine turns ancestry into a weapon. A surname becomes an invitation or a sentence. A rumor becomes enough to make a neighbor step away from a doorway. The Ministry of Magic receives reports, opens files, and sends officials into places where the danger has already moved elsewhere. Voldemort's influence expands through fear, secrecy, and the promise of belonging. The Death Eaters do not need to occupy every street because their presence is felt wherever people begin to lower their voices. You are in a kitchen after supper, with rain against the windows and a kettle cooling upon the stove. A family sits close together beneath yellow light. The newspaper lies folded beside a plate. No one wishes to read the latest account aloud. At work, doors close more quickly when unfamiliar names are mentioned. In village lanes, footsteps behind you seem to remain at the same distance for too long. At Hogwarts, students pause beside corridor corners before continuing. The cold stone underfoot gives no reassurance. Above the rooftops, owls carry letters whose contents may alter a household before morning. Ordinary rooms become places of listening. The First Wizarding War develops before Harry Potter begins at Hogwarts in 1991, and its pressure reaches families who have never sought a political cause. You're walking through a London street where rain has polished the paving stones to a dull shine. Shop windows glow against the dark. A ministry employee hurries beneath an umbrella, clutching a sealed envelope. Behind a nearby door, muted voices discuss disappearances, arrests, and names that should not be written down. The war is not always visible as battle. It lives in delayed trains, abandoned houses, and empty chairs at breakfast. It appears in the glance exchanged between two strangers at a public fireplace. It settles over workplaces and school corridors, making every familiar passage feel watched. The Ministry of Magic struggles to respond effectively as Voldemort's influence grows beyond the reach of ordinary warnings. Some Death Eaters are imprisoned in Azkaban after claiming that they acted under the Imperious Curse. You are looking across a grey stretch of sea towards the fortress of Azkaban, where the wind moves sharply over black water. The prison rises from the island like a broken tooth. Salt lies upon the air. Iron doors close within its walls, one after another, and the sound travels through narrow corridors. Those accused of serving Voldemort speak of enchantment. They say that the Imperious Curse controlled their actions, turning their bodies into instruments of another will. Some are believed, others are not. The Ministry must decide while public fear presses against every hearing. No verdict restores the vanished person, the ruined home, or the confidence that protection will arrive in time. Bellatrix Lestrange stands among Voldemort's most fanatical followers, and her devotion gives the war a particularly terrible intensity. You are in a darkened drawing room where the curtains are drawn against the rain. The fire has burned low, leaving the furniture in red and brown shadow. A woman's voice rises behind a closed door, sharp with certainty rather than panic. Bellatrix Lestrange does not treat Voldemort's cause as a distant political belief. She gives it loyalty, pride, and personal hunger. Around her, the Death Eaters sit beneath old portraits of families who regard blood as a measure of worth. Silver frames catch the firelight. A glass trembles upon a side table. Outside, coal smoke moves over a darkening village, while the language of supremacy becomes increasingly comfortable. Families learn that official protection may arrive after the danger has already entered the house. You are standing in the hallway of a home where the lamps remain lit long after midnight. A cloak hangs beside the door, still damp from the weather. The kitchen smells of tea, ashes, and cold bread. Somewhere upstairs, a child turns in sleep. The adults speak in whispers, checking windows and listening for movement beyond the garden wall. A ministry patrol may come in the morning. A warning may arrive after the attack. The difference between safety and danger narrows to a single sound upon the gravel. Through the glass, rain gathers on the dark lawn. The house seems small beneath the enormous night, and every room depends upon doors that may not hold. In 1981, after Voldemort's first downfall, Frank and Alice Longbottom are attacked by Death Eaters who seek information about their master. You are near a hospital corridor where the light is pale, and the floor has been polished to a muted gleam. Healers move quietly between doors. The air carries traces of potion ingredients, linen, and rain-soaked wool. Frank and Alice Longbottom have been tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange and other Death Eaters who demand the whereabouts of Voldemort. Their minds are damaged beyond ordinary recovery. The attack comes after Voldemort's first downfall, when his followers are frightened, scattered, and desperate to discover whether he has truly gone. The corridor remains calm in appearance. A window shows the winter sky. Beyond the walls, the cold air moves through the grounds, while the silence around Frank and Alice becomes part of the history of the war. The public knows that Voldemort has vanished on 31 October 1981, but at first, no one knows how or why. You are in a village where the morning begins with wet roads, dark hedges, and smoke rising from chimneys. News travels unevenly. One household hears that Voldemort is gone. Another hears only that something happened in a small house at Godric's Hollow. The name is spoken with uncertainty. No explanation satisfies the first reports. The ministry offers fragments. Neighbors exchange cautious accounts beside gates and shop counters. Rain touches the distant windows of London, while village coal fires burn low beneath an altered sky. On 31 October 1981, the disappearance becomes known before its cause does. Britain has received an ending without understanding the event that produced it. Godric's Hollow becomes a place of grief and unanswered questions, while the wider wizarding world tries to decide whether the war has ended. You are moving along a quiet lane bordered by wet stone walls. Leaves cling to the ground. The air smells of earth, smoke, and rain. Curtains remain closed in nearby houses, though dawn has already arrived. A name once spoken as a whispered warning is now accompanied by another kind of silence. People ask whether Voldemort is dead, hidden, or waiting. Some Death Eaters are taken to Azkaban. Others disappear into respectable homes and deny everything. The ministry records statements. Families count their losses. No one yet understands what has happened to the child found among the ruins, or why a new story is beginning at the edge of the old one. The years before 1991 leave their mark upon Hogwarts, even when the castle resumes the appearance of ordinary schooling. You are walking through a corridor in the early morning, beneath windows silvered with frost. The cold stone gives back the quiet sound of your steps. Portraits sleep behind their curtains. A suit of armor holds a faint line of reflected light along its shoulder. Somewhere below, kitchens begin their work. Somewhere above, owls shift inside their tower and prepare for the day. The school has known Tom Riddle as a pupil, Slytherin as an ancestor, Myrtle Warren as a dead girl, and Albus Dumbledore as a teacher who watched the darkness form. The names remain within the walls. The castle keeps them without speaking. Now the village settles beneath coal smoke, and rain thins itself against the windows of distant London. You are beside a quiet fire, though the room around you is only dimly suggested. The stone beneath your feet is cool. A door rests closed. Voices murmur somewhere beyond it, too soft to separate into words. Outside, winter air moves through empty streets. An owl crosses the darkness above the roofs. Tom Marvolo Riddle is still a name in old records. Lord Voldemort is still a whispered warning. Hogwarts stands beneath its dark sky. The corridors wait. The rain continues. The fire lowers. Britain, for a little while, grows quiet. You are standing in a narrow room where a single lamp illuminates one end of a scarred wooden table. Damp wool hangs from the backs of chairs, and the scent of firewood settles beneath the colder smell of rain. Somewhere above, an old beam gives a patient groan as the house contracts in the winter night. The floorboards creak beneath hurried footsteps beyond the closed door, then fall still again. A cup of cold tea remains untouched beside a stack of folded parchment. Its surface has gathered a thin skin, disturbed only when the table trembles beneath distant movement. Outside, a deserted lane lies silver beneath the moon, and the faint crack of apparition briefly interrupts the darkness. Nobody speaks loudly here, because every wall seems capable of carrying a message farther than intended. During Voldemort's first rise, Albus Dumbledore gathered people who understood that the ministry alone could not protect Britain. You enter that decision quietly, through the recollections of those who waited around tables such as this one. The Order of the Phoenix was founded as a resistance organization, created to oppose Voldemort and his Death Eaters wherever their influence could be reached. It was not a government department, and it possessed no official offices, uniforms, or public authority. Its strength came from personal trust, practical courage, and the willingness to act without recognition. Dumbledore brought together experienced auras, teachers, fugitives, friends, and families whose lives had already been touched by the conflict. In the earliest years, the Order operated during the First Wizarding War, moving through a country where ordinary routines continued beneath a growing fear. The lamp burns with a low amber steadiness, leaving the corners of the room in soft brown shadow. Dust floats through its narrow circle of light, turning slowly whenever the fire shifts in the grate. Damp wool carries the faint mineral smell of rainwater and cold pavement, while firewood releases a dry sweetness from the hearth. You feel the table's uneven grain beneath your fingertips, worn smooth where many hands have rested during difficult conversations. A loose shutter taps once against the outer wall, and the sound travels through the quiet house like a small signal. Nearby, cold tea darkens inside a chipped cup, its forgotten warmth long surrendered to the room. The air holds the faint crack of apparition from the deserted lane, followed by silence so complete that your breathing seems to belong to the building. Among the names gathered into the Order were Alastor Moody, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, James Potter, and Lily Potter. You see them not as distant figures in a finished story, but as people arriving separately, carrying coats, messages, and private exhaustion. Alastor Moody was an experienced aura, already known for suspicion and vigilance, whose attention moved constantly toward windows, doors, and unexplained pauses. Sirius Black was Harry's godfather and one of James Potter's closest friends, bound to him by years of mischief and later by war. Remus Lupin was a werewolf and had been a fellow Hogwarts student of James, Sirius, and Peter Pettigrew. Peter belonged to the same friendship group, carrying the old intimacy of school days into a dangerous adult world. Their school friendships became wartime alliances, though the future would place a heavy silence over them. Rainwater glistens along the window frame, gathering in small beads before slipping down the glass. The fire has burned low, and the coals breathe a muted red beneath their covering of ash. A woolen sleeve brushes against the table as someone leans forward, releasing the smell of lanolin and damp streets. You hear the slow ticking of a clock whose hands are difficult to see in the darkness. Each sound remains separate for a moment. The scrape of a chair, the faint settling of timber, the subdued hiss of a log. Beyond the walls, Britain continues its ordinary sleep, with chimney smoke thinning above rooftops and hedges shining beneath the weather. Yet the room carries another atmosphere, made from waiting, caution, and the understanding that footsteps outside may belong to either friend or enemy. The Order's work required secrecy, because Voldemort possessed sympathizers and informants within institutions expected to offer protection. You move with its members through concealed rooms, borrowed houses, and deserted lanes where information changes hands beneath unlit windows. Messages are coded, names are sometimes withheld, and plans are divided so that no single captured person can reveal everything. The Ministry of Magic remains present in the background, but the Order cannot depend upon its speed, loyalty, or clarity. Some officials are frightened, some are compromised, and others cannot imagine how quickly an old society is being altered. Dumbledore's organization therefore works beyond formal authority, using private networks and personal judgment. Every member carries knowledge that could endanger another, and every meeting becomes an exercise in divided trust. A pale draught moves beneath the door and stirs the edges of the parchment on the table. The paper smells faintly of dust, ink, and the dry fibers of old envelopes kept too long in a drawer. Somewhere downstairs, a kettle has cooled without being emptied, leaving a metallic trace among the warmer scents of ash and wood smoke. You notice the pressure of silence between one creak and the next, as though the house itself is listening through its beams. A chair stands slightly apart from the others, its back turned toward the wall for reasons nobody explains. The lamp's brass base has been polished by repeated handling, though the surrounding surface remains marked by rings from abandoned cups. Outside, the lane is empty again, and only a shallow disturbance in the air suggests that someone has recently departed. James Potter and Lily Potter had already fought Voldemort before Harry was born, carrying resistance into the years when their future family remained unknown. You find them in the memories of friends, moving between ordinary domestic obligations and sudden demands from the Order. Their lives contain meals prepared in haste, letters hidden inside books, and evenings interrupted by the need to leave without explanation. James brings the energy of an old-school friendship into dangerous work, while Lily's presence gives the surrounding fear a different kind of steadiness. They are not symbols yet, and nobody in those rooms knows how later generations will speak their names. They are young people trying to preserve a home while the world presses against its windows. Around them, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin continue the same struggle, carrying loyalty and uncertainty through the First Wizarding War. The room has grown warmer near the hearth, although the window remains cold enough to chill the air around it. Firewood cracks softly, sending a few sparks upward before they vanish among the blackened stones. The smell of damp wool deepens whenever the door opens, bringing in traces of mud, rain, and distant frost. You hear hurried footsteps cross the passage, causing the floorboards to complain in familiar places. On the table, cold tea waits beside a knife, a bundle of keys, and a folded scarf whose fibers catch the lamplight. The objects seem modest, yet each belongs to a life arranged around interruptions. A dark lane lies beyond the garden wall, and the faint crack of apparition has become part of the night's texture. Even the quiet carries movement, concealed beneath the steady lowering of the fire. Arthur and Molly Weasley represented the Weasley family among the Order's allies, bringing a sense of family continuity into a group increasingly shaped by danger. You see their names beside messages concerning food, shelter, children, and the safe movement of people across the country. Their involvement reminds the Order that resistance cannot be separated entirely from ordinary life. Someone must keep a household functioning, repair a broken window, prepare a meal, or reassure a frightened child while adults discuss disappearances. The Weasley family does not stand apart from the conflict, even when its members are not present at every meeting. Arthur contributes knowledge of the ministry's workings, while Molly's practical strength gives the surrounding uncertainty a human boundary. Through them, the Order's secret war remains connected to kitchens, gardens, family rooms, and the small necessities of survival. A narrow flame bends when air slips through the chimney, casting a long movement across the ceiling. The plaster above you carries hairline cracks, each one darkened by years of smoke and winter damp. Firewood rests in a small iron basket, its rough bark shedding fragments onto the stone floor. Your sleeve catches briefly against the table's splintered edge, and the minor resistance makes the room feel more solid. The untouched tea has lost its color beneath the lamp, while a second cup bears the faint mark of someone's mouth. From the passage comes a careful tread, lighter than the earlier footsteps, followed by a pause near the door. No voice accompanies it. Outside, the deserted lane holds the clean smell of wet earth, and the night seems to wait without deciding whether it will deepen or break. Rubeus Hagrid was an original member of the Order, and his presence brought a physical warmth that did not make the work less serious. You imagine him entering beneath a low lintel, carrying rain on his enormous coat and lowering his voice when the room requires quiet. His size makes concealment difficult, yet his loyalty gives the others a dependable point of steadiness. The Order depends upon people with very different abilities, temperaments, and histories, because no single kind of courage can answer every threat. Hagrid's knowledge of forests and hidden paths becomes useful when roads are watched and official routes feel unsafe. Around the same table, Moody measures every pause, Sirius listens for danger, and Lupin weighs the consequences of each proposal. Dumbledore holds the gathering together, though even his authority cannot prevent fear from entering the room. The firewood gives off a resinous fragrance as a fresh log warms, and the scent mingles with the wet wool hanging near the entrance. Rain continues along the roof, sometimes delicate as fingertips, sometimes heavy enough to blur the boundary between outside and inside. You hear the floorboards creak beneath a hurried crossing, then feel the vibration disappear into the walls. The single lamp leaves a bright oval on the table and turns every other surface indistinct. A parchment corner lifts, settles, and lifts once more in the draught from the chimney. Cold tea remains where it was left, a small sign that conversation has taken precedence over comfort. Far down the deserted lane, a faint crack of apparition arrives without a visible figure, and the darkness closes over it immediately. As the war continues, the Order carries out resistance work while attempting to preserve ordinary family life. You pass through houses where protective charms surround bedrooms, meals are served beneath conversations about safer subjects, and children learn not to repeat certain names. Members deliver warnings, observe suspected allies, escort threatened families, and search for signs of Death Eater movement. Their work rarely produces public victories, because secrecy makes recognition impossible and success often appears only as an absence. A person reaches home before being found, a message arrives before a raid, or a hidden family remains undiscovered for another night. James and Lily protect the life they hope to build, while Sirius and Remus move between friendship, duty, and the changing demands of the Order. Every peaceful evening is therefore both genuine and temporary. The house settles into its night rhythm, with the fire whispering and the old clock marking seconds beneath the rafters. A thin line of moisture shines on the window, reflecting the lamp as a trembling gold thread. The chair legs leave pale scratches in the floorboards, evidence of meetings that began calmly and ended in sudden movement. You smell wet leather near the door, mixed with ash, wool, and the faint sweetness of cooling tea. The table feels colder beyond the lamp's circle, and the room's darkness seems to possess its own depth. A draught passes over your hands, carrying the scent of the deserted lane and the distant river. Nothing outside announces danger, yet the absence of sound becomes a form of information. Here, quiet is never empty. Dumbledore's gatherings grow more careful as the Order learns that loyalty cannot always be measured by affection. You stand beside a wall while names are spoken indirectly. Routes are disguised as household errands, and information is divided among people who may never know the entire plan. Sirius Black trusts the old bonds of friendship, while Alistair Moody insists that vigilance must survive even among familiar faces. Remus Lupin carries the patience of someone accustomed to being watched, and Peter Pettigrew remains within the circle formed at Hogwarts years earlier. Their shared past makes cooperation easier, yet it also creates assumptions that secrecy cannot safely permit. The Order's meetings are shaped by coded information and divided trust, because Voldemort's reach extends through fear as well as allegiance. Under Dumbledore's direction, the organization becomes quieter, more mobile, and increasingly burdened by what it cannot say. The lamp's wick has shortened, and a darker rim of smoke gathers around the glass chimney. Firewood collapses inward with a soft sigh, exposing embers that glow like buried copper. The scent of damp wool remains close to the walls, while the floorboards release a dry, dusty odor beneath passing shoes. You hear one hurried step, then another, each placed carefully where the boards are least likely to complain. A cup is moved without being lifted, leaving a brown crescent on on the table's surface. Beyond the shutter, the deserted lane reflects a weak strip of moonlight between hedges. The faint crack of apparition rises once more, farther away than before, and dissolves into the rain. The room holds its warmth unevenly, as though every person has brought separate weather inside. The Order suffers severe losses before Voldemort's first defeat, and each absence changes the shape of the remaining work. You enter rooms where an empty chair is left untouched, because removing it would make the loss feel too complete. Messages stop arriving from certain houses. Familiar footsteps no longer cross the passage, and names become difficult to place on current lists. The members continue their resistance, but courage now carries the weight of expectation, grief, and unfinished promises. Dumbledore gathers those who remain, speaking with measured calm, while the organization grows smaller around him. Moody's suspicion hardens into a daily necessity, and Sirius's loyalty becomes inseparable from the memory of James and Lily. Remus continues to move through the war with quiet endurance. Each survivor carries more than personal sorrow, because the fallen have become part of every decision. Cold air presses through the window frame, touching your face with the clean sharpness of winter. The fire provides only modest warmth, and the stones near the hearth retain the night's chill beneath their surface. Damp wool has begun to dry, giving off a muted earthy smell beside the brighter fragrance of fresh firewood. The clock's pendulum moves steadily, though the sound seems farther away whenever rain thickens overhead. You notice a small thread of steam rising from nobody's cup, although the tea has been untouched for too long to retain warmth. Floorboards creak beneath measured footsteps in the corridor, followed by the faint scrape of a latch. Outside, the lane remains deserted, and a brief crack of apparition fades among the hedges. Darkness gathers gently at the corners, without hurry or alarm. Before Harry's birth, James Potter, Lily Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, and their allies had already lived through years of danger. You see their friendship as something carried forward from Hogwarts into a world that no longer permits careless play. Remus had shared those school days as a fellow student, despite the private burden of being a werewolf. Sirius had stood closest to James, becoming his confidant and later Harry's godfather. Peter had belonged to the same friendship group, included in the old circle, whose members believed they understood one another. Their history gives the Order a language of familiar gestures, half-finished jokes, and remembered places. It also makes betrayal, suspicion, and grief more difficult to recognize when they first appear. The past remains present in every wartime alliance, even when nobody speaks of school. The fire has settled into a quiet bed of red, and the lamp now seems brighter by comparison. A faint smell of rain enters whenever the door shifts, bringing the outside world close to the edge of the room. Woolen coats hang heavily, their cuffs marked by mud from paths and lanes traveled after dark. You hear the floorboards answer each footstep with a different note, some hollow, some sharp, some softened by age. The table's surface carries old scratches beneath its scattered papers, and the lamp reveals them only when someone leans across the light. Cold tea rests beside a closed notebook, its pages swollen slightly from damp air. Beyond the garden, the deserted lane offers no movement, though the silence is interrupted by one distant crack of apparition. The night continues without explanation. As Voldemort's power expands, the Order learns that endurance may require becoming almost invisible. You move through concealed passages, empty alleys, and borrowed rooms where conversations end before names can be written down. Members use coded information because spoken details can be stolen, repeated, or extracted under pressure. They watch institutions from the edges, knowing that sympathizers and informants may be present where official protection is promised. No ministry office can be treated as entirely safe, and no familiar uniform guarantees a trustworthy intention. The resistance organization, therefore, survives through small acts performed by people who often appear to be doing nothing unusual. A letter is placed beneath a loose stone, a warning is carried inside a basket, and a guarded door opens for only a few seconds. Britain's first wizarding war is fought in such fragments, scattered across the spaces between ordinary days. The single lamp hums faintly, its flame narrowing whenever the draught reaches the table. You feel the rough weave of a chair beneath your palm, still cool from the person who left it moments earlier. Firewood shifts in the grate, and a dry shower of ash settles onto the stone with almost no sound. The room smells of wet wool, old paper, and the dark sweetness of wood beginning to burn. Along the passage, hurried footsteps slow near the closed door, as if whoever approaches has remembered the importance of caution. A cup of cold tea stands within reach, untouched through an entire conversation. Rain threads down the window in crooked lines, gathering the lamp's reflection and carrying it towards the sill. Somewhere in the deserted lane, apparition leaves a faint crack in the air, and then the house resumes its stillness. The First Order becomes quieter as its losses accumulate, not because the danger has diminished, but because fewer voices remain to fill the rooms. You stand among survivors who have learned to leave space around certain subjects and to fold grief into practical instructions. Dumbledore continues to gather people when necessary, yet the meetings grow shorter, more guarded, and more dependent upon memory. Moody checks every entrance. Sirius listens for the names of missing friends, and Remus carries his exhaustion with the same restraint he brings to every task. Arthur and Molly Weasley remain among the Order's allies, representing the family life that the Resistance is trying to preserve. Hagrid remains connected to the original organization, a large and loyal figure within a world that increasingly rewards concealment. The work proceeds, though the earlier warmth of the group has begun to recede. The walls hold the smell of firewood long after the flames have lowered, and the damp wool near the doorway dries into a heavier, darker scent. A small patch of condensation clouds the window, obscuring the lane beyond the glass. You hear the building breathe through its chimney, with one low rush followed by the faint rattle of ash. The floorboards creak under a solitary crossing, then remain silent for several moments. On the table, the lamp throws a narrow shadow from the untouched tea, making the cup appear taller than it is. A folded message lies beneath a brass weight, its corners softened by handling. The night air moves across your face whenever the door opens, cold and clean, before retreating behind the latch. Nothing is hurried now, though everything remains ready. In 1981, Voldemort disappears after the attack that leaves Harry alive, and the war's visible terror briefly loses its center. You remain within the quiet that follows, where people speak of victory with caution because the cost has not been settled. The original Order of the Phoenix ceases to function as an active organization after Voldemort's disappearance. Its members return to homes, prisons, graves, hospitals, investigations, and memories that cannot be made ordinary again. James Potter and Lily Potter are gone, while Sirius Black is believed to have betrayed them, and Peter Pettigrew vanishes into the confusion. Remus Lupin is left with the burden of survival, and Alistair Moody continues to regard peace as something requiring examination. The Order has ended in practice, yet its purpose remains preserved in the people who remember why Dumbledore created it. Winter light enters weakly through the window, touching the table without dispelling the room's deeper shadows. The firewood has become pale ash, and a thin warmth lingers only in the stones closest to the grate. Damp wool hangs motionless, giving the room the smell of coats removed after a long journey. You hear a floorboard creak beneath no visible foot, perhaps responding to the house's shifting weight. The lamp has gone out, leaving a dark ring of soot along its glass chimney. Cold tea remains in its cup, its surface reflecting the grey morning with a dull, unbroken sheen. Outside, the deserted lane is marked by rain and scattered leaves, while a distant bird begins a hesitant call. The First Order has passed into silence, but the room still seems shaped by its presence. Years later, Voldemort returns, and Dumbledore reforms the Order of the Phoenix to oppose him once again. You find the old name carried into new rooms, where familiar survivors meet beside people who were children during the First War. Sirius Black returns to the work as Harry's godfather and as one of James Potter's closest friends, though the years have altered every old certainty. Remus Lupin returns as well, still a werewolf, still carrying the history of Hogwarts with James, Sirius, and Peter Pettigrew. Alastor Moody remains experienced, suspicious, and vigilant, as though danger has never stopped waiting beyond a door. Rubeus Hagrid belongs again to the Resistance, while Arthur and Molly Weasley stand among its important allies. The reformed order is not a simple continuation, because memory has changed its members, and the new war asks different questions. A single lamp again illuminates a table, though the room is not the same room, and the faces around it belong to another season. Firewood burns more brightly than before, sending a resinous scent along the ceiling where rain has left darkened patches. Coats release damp wool into the warmth, and the floorboards creak beneath footsteps that have learned to move quickly without seeming hurried. A cup of cold tea waits beside a fresh message, abandoned when news arrived from elsewhere. You hear the faint crack of apparition in a deserted lane, followed by the closing of a distant gate. The air carries the smell of wet stone and autumn leaves, though the fire suggests that winter is near. Around the table, shadows overlap, and the old names return softly to the living world. The reformed order inherits the first organization's habits of secrecy, coded information, and divided trust. You move through its renewed network, knowing that Voldemort's sympathizers may again occupy positions within institutions, offices, and respectable households. The Resistance remains separate from government authority, even when its members possess experience inside the ministry or connections to official work. Dumbledore gathers people who cannot rely on public structures alone, and their private network begins once more to carry warnings across Britain. The old losses guide their caution, while the younger generation gives the organization a different urgency. James and Lily's friends now stand beside those who knew them only through stories, photographs, and the living child they left behind. The Order has become both a present alliance and a memorial, carrying the First War within every new arrangement. Rain taps lightly against the glass, each drop separated by a brief interval of silence. The lamp makes a small island of amber across the table, leaving the chairs beyond it softened and indistinct. Firewood shifts with a dry murmur, and the scent of smoke rests beneath the stronger odor of wet wool. Your feet remain planted on floorboards polished by many years of movement, their creaks rising whenever someone crosses the room. Cold tea has gathered beside the rim of its cup, while a pencil lies across a page covered in careful marks. Outside, the deserted lane gleams beneath a thin veil of rain, and the night air reaches you through the smallest gap in the window. A faint crack of apparition appears beyond the hedge, then disappears before any footsteps follow. The Order's members attempt to preserve ordinary family life, even while the second conflict gathers around them. You enter kitchens, where Arthur and Molly Weasley prepare meals beneath protective charms, and where children learn the difference between private and public conversation. Sirius carries the memory of James into every room, while Remus carries the memory of a friendship damaged by fear and betrayal. Moody treats every unexplained detail as significant, and Hagrid brings news from places that ordinary messengers cannot easily reach. Dumbledore's Resistance organization remains dependent upon people willing to leave domestic safety without knowing when they will return. The work is again scattered through hidden journeys, guarded meetings, and messages concealed inside harmless objects. Family life continues, but its boundaries have become permeable, with danger entering through letters, fireplaces, and the sudden absence of familiar voices. The old house grows quieter as the hour advances, though the weather outside continues its slow movement across the roofs. A lamp flame trembles against the glass, and a pale reflection appears in the window like a second, distant room. Damp wool breathes out its last traces of rain, mingling with firewood and the clean scent of cold air. Floorboards creak beneath a careful step near the hearth, then settle into their familiar silence. The untouched tea has become part of the furniture, no longer seeming connected to the person who poured it. You hear the clock pause between two marks, though its mechanism resumes before the stillness becomes complete. Along the deserted lane, one faint crack of apparition touches the night. The room receives the sound without surprise and keeps its warmth. The first order becomes, in memory, larger than the number of people who survive it. You stand among later members and hear the names of Albus Dumbledore, James Potter, Lily Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Alastor Moody, and Rubeus Hagrid carried forward together. Some names belong to the dead, some to the living, and some to histories whose truth has been distorted by fear. Arthur and Molly Weasley remain connected to the Order's allies, representing the families that continue the work through changing generations. The organization's purpose remains clear across the years: to oppose Voldemort and the Death Eaters when official systems cannot be trusted. Its first life ended in 1981 after Voldemort disappeared, yet its meaning did not end with the closing of its meetings. A resistance can cease to gather while still shaping the choices of those who remember it. Morning has not yet fully arrived, though the sky beyond the window has softened from black to charcoal. The fire gives little heat now, and the last firewood rests among white ash and small, fading embers. Damp wool hangs quietly by the door, holding the smell of journeys made under rain. You hear the floorboards creak once beneath the weight of the old house, then the clock resumes its patient measurement of time. The lamp remains the brightest object in the room, its circle touching the cup of cold tea and the folded messages. Outside, the deserted lane waits beneath wet hedges, silvered by the first uncertain light. A final trace of apparition seems to linger in the distance, though no sound follows it. The house keeps its secrets as the morning gathers. The Order of the Phoenix began with Dumbledore's refusal to depend entirely upon institutions that had become vulnerable to fear and influence. You remain at the edge of that first gathering, where old-school friendships become wartime alliances and private loyalties acquire public danger. Sirius Black stands beside James Potter, Remus Lupin carries his hidden burden, and Peter Pettigrew remains within their circle. Lily Potter works alongside them, while Moody watches the doors and Hagrid waits among the original members. Arthur and Molly Weasley support the alliance through the practical strength of family life. Around them, the resistance organizes itself through secrecy, coded information, and divided trust. The First Wizarding War continues beyond the room, but the Order gives its members a place where scattered courage can become deliberate action. Its table is small, its purpose immense, and its future already touched by loss. The lamp's light fades as daylight reaches the window, revealing scratches, stains, and old burn marks across the table. Firewood has left a grey softness over the hearth, and the smell of smoke settles beneath the cooler scent of rain. Your hand rests on the chairs worn back, where years of damp coats and hurried departures have darkened the wood. Floorboards creak as the house prepares for morning, carrying the faint impression of footsteps that are no longer present. Cold tea remains in its cup, surrounded by parchment, keys, and the quiet remains of a night devoted to difficult decisions. Outside, the lane is still empty, though the roofs beyond it have begun to catch a diluted silver glow. The air across your face is cold but gentle. Winter has not ended, yet darkness has loosened its hold. In the memory of the Order, the First War does not appear as a single clear sequence, but as a collection of rooms, roads, names, and absences. You move between those fragments without haste, passing from Dumbledore's table to the homes guarded by James and Lily, and from hidden messages to deserted lanes. You hear Moody's warning, Sirius's loyalty, Lupin's patience, and the quiet practical care of Arthur and Molly Weasley. You sense Hagrid's large presence among the original members, and you carry the knowledge that Peter Pettigrew belonged to the same Hogwarts friendship group. The Order loses people before Voldemort's first defeat, then ceases to function actively after his disappearance in 1981. Yet the organization remains alive in recollection, because each survivor carries a portion of its purpose into the years that follow. A quiet resistance can leave a lasting shape. The morning air enters through the loosened window and moves across your face with the scent of wet leaves. A thin warmth survives in the hearth, but the floor near the door remains cold beneath your feet. Damp wool and firewood linger together, forming the familiar smell of a house that has endured many nights. The table stands beneath the single lamp, its surface now pale beneath the growing daylight. A cup of cold tea waits beside a folded scarf, and neither object seems ready to be moved. The floorboards give one final creak in the passage, followed by the soft click of a latch. Beyond the wall, the deserted lane receives the first distant traffic of morning. Somewhere farther away, a faint crack of apparition touches the day, and the sound passes gently into ordinary noise. At the family supper, the curtains are drawn before sunset, although the sky beyond them still holds a little grey light. You sit beside a polished table while plates cool beneath the quiet glow of a shaded lamp. Around you, spoons touch china with small, careful sounds, and the house seems to breathe through its walls. A kettle cools on the kitchen range, its metal body ticking softly as the fire settles. Distant footsteps pass along a garden path, pause near the gate, and continue without hurry. Then the wireless murmurs from the adjoining room, carrying a fragment of hurried speech into the warmth. Another household has been attacked. The names are spoken once, then again, until they seem to occupy the empty chair at the end of the table. No one reaches for the pudding, and the room grows attentive to every sound outside. The First Wizarding War has entered both magical families and the wider wizarding community, leaving no clean boundary between danger and ordinary life. The Death Eaters use murder, torture, and intimidation to spread fear through homes, streets, shops, and distant villages. Their violence does not always arrive with a visible procession. A locked door, an absent neighbor, or a silent fireplace can carry the same warning. You remain at the supper table while the news continues in a low voice from the next room. The house has already begun its nightly retreat from the world, its curtains closed before sunset. Beyond the glass, winter frost whitens a window pane in delicate branching lines. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, footsteps move along the path, and everyone waits for them to fade. The report describes broken windows, overturned furniture, and a family found gathered together in a room where the fire has gone out. No official notice explains whether the attack was chosen for its victims, its location, or the fear it might create elsewhere. You hear that neighbors saw cloaked figures near the lane, though none can agree on how many there were. Another voice says the household had been warned before, and a third answers that warnings have become almost indistinguishable from threats. The meal continues without appetite, because stopping entirely would give the news too much authority. A knife lies beside an untouched piece of bread, reflecting the lamp in a narrow silver line. Each person listens for the scrape of a shoe outside, the murmur of a wand, or the sudden interruption of silence. Prominent auras, families with old names, and quiet households without public influence have all begun arranging their lives around the possibility of violence. The Longbottoms stand among those most openly opposed to Voldemort, and their resistance has made them known beyond their own circle. Frank and Alice Longbottom serve as auras, carrying the duties of investigation and protection into a war that increasingly enters private rooms. Their name is spoken with respect in offices, corridors, and guarded kitchens, where maps remain rolled beneath chairs. You imagine their home in the evening, with the windows dark and the garden path carrying distant footsteps whenever someone approaches the front door. Cold gathers at the glass, whitening the panes, while lamps remain burning inside. Frank and Alice oppose Voldemort when opposition requires more than a public statement or a discreet refusal. Their work places them among the families who understand that resistance can become a permanent condition of domestic life. You see papers stacked beneath a lamp, protective charms renewed around the windows, and traveling cloaks resting near the entrance. The house remains orderly, yet its order has acquired the firmness of preparation. News arrives from other districts, bearing accounts of murder, torture, and intimidation carried out by the Death Eaters. Each account narrows the distance between distant conflict and the chair where you are sitting. A kettle cools beside the range, releasing the faint scent of old tea into the kitchen. Along the garden path, footsteps approach through damp grass, while the drawn curtains conceal their owner from everyone inside. The central threat disappears in 1981, when Voldemort vanishes and the war seems, for a brief time, to lose its center. Celebration enters the streets, but relief does not reach every locked room or every family that has kept watch through the night. The danger has withdrawn without offering an explanation, leaving people uncertain whether the silence represents defeat, concealment, or merely a pause. You stand beside a window while frost whitens the lower panes, and the last daylight drains from the garden. The kettle has gone cold before anyone remembers to pour it. Beyond the curtains, distant footsteps cross the path and vanish near the hedge. The Longbottoms are still alive, still known, and still connected to the struggle that has supposedly ended. Their household shows how resistance can continue to carry danger after the central threat has vanished. In the months following Voldemort's disappearance, Frank and Alice remain marked by their work and opposition. The household does not become invisible merely because the most feared name has fallen silent. You move through a corridor where coats hang beneath protective charms, while the house keeps its familiar arrangement of doors, staircases, and lamps. Outside, the path is dark with winter moisture, and the windows have been covered before sunset. A kettle cools on a range reduced to embers. On the nearest pane, frost spreads across the glass like a pale map of branches. These details belong to an evening that might have remained ordinary if four attackers had not come looking for information. Their names later become inseparable from the violence carried into the Longbottom home. Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus Lestrange, Rabastan Lestrange, and Barty Crouch Jr. seek the Longbottoms after Voldemort's disappearance in 1981. They believe Frank and Alice may know where their master has gone, or may possess information that could lead them towards him. The attack is not a battle between opposing forces in open ground, but an intrusion into a family's private life. You remain near the imagined doorway while the night gathers behind the curtains. The kettle has cooled completely, and the medicinal smell of St. Mungo's Hospital belongs still to a future no one can foresee. Distant footsteps move along the garden path, their rhythm too measured to be mistaken for a passing neighbor. Frost whitens the window pane, and the glass gives back only the dim outline of the room. The four Death Eaters use torture against Frank and Alice, trying to uncover Voldemort's whereabouts through pain. Bellatrix is present, as are Rodolphus, Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr., and the attack becomes one of the war's most terrible private acts. You place the scene within a house where familiar objects remain in their places, though fear has altered their meaning. A chair stands near the hearth, a cloak lies beside the stairs, and the curtains shut away the last ordinary light. There is no welcoming sound from the garden path, only footsteps that stop outside and a silence pressing against the door. The kettle has long since cooled on the range. Later, in the quiet wards of St. Mungo's, the medicinal smell will cling to the air around the Longbottoms. Frank and Alice are permanently incapacitated by the torture, and neither returns to the life that existed before the attack. Their bodies survive, but their ability to live independently has been taken from them, leaving the family divided between memory and care. You pass through the hospital in thought, beneath high windows where pale daylight touches polished floors. The medicinal smell of St. Mungo's rests over everything, mixed with linen, potions, and the faint mineral scent of clean water. Somewhere beyond the ward, a kettle cools on a staff kitchen range, ticking as it loses its heat. The curtains in the patients' rooms are drawn before sunset, even when the weather outside remains gentle. Through one narrow pane, frost whitens the glass, while distant footsteps move along a corridor instead of a garden path. Frank and Alice later live at St. Mungo's, within a place built for healing that cannot restore what was lost. The Longbottom attack occurs after Voldemort's disappearance in 1981, making the event especially difficult for those who believed the danger was ending. Public relief turns uneasy when the news spreads, because the vanished enemy still seems able to reach into the homes of his opponents. You stand in a hospital corridor where doors remain closed and lamps burn steadily above the polished floor. The medicinal smell is strongest near the ward, mingling with potion vapor and the clean sharpness of bandages. A kettle cools on a kitchen range at the far end, surrounded by cups that no one has touched. Curtains are drawn across every high window, and frost whitens the panes outside. The only approaching sounds are distant footsteps on corridor stones, each one softened before it reaches the beds. The war has disappeared from the streets, yet its hand remains visible in the quiet arrangement of a hospital room. Neville Longbottom was born on 30 July 1980, while the First Wizarding War was still unfolding around his family. His arrival belongs to a summer date, but the circumstances of his childhood are shaped by fear gathered through the preceding years. You see a small room prepared for an infant, with folded blankets beside a cradle and a curtain lifting slightly in the warm air. The kettle has been left to cool, because attention has moved towards the child sleeping nearby. A garden path lies beyond the window, carrying the occasional tread of a visitor. Nothing in the room announces the prophecy that will later connect Neville to a danger he cannot remember. The Longbottom name is already associated with courage and resistance, while the infant remains sheltered beneath a roof that seems, for a time, entirely secure. Neville is one of two children who could have matched Sybil Trelawney's prophecy, which concerned a child born as July ended. The other possible child is Harry Potter, and the uncertainty surrounding the prophecy places both families within Voldemort's reach. You remain beside the cradle while summer darkness gathers beyond the curtains. The kettle cools slowly on the range, and the house carries the soft smells of linen, wood polish, and warm milk. Along the garden path, distant footsteps approach carefully before turning away. The glass is clear tonight, without winter frost, yet the room still feels guarded. Neville is not old enough to understand a name, a prophecy, or a threat. His parents carry those meanings for him, as James and Lily Potter carry them for their infant son. The Potters and Longbottoms are both considered possible targets, because the prophecy leaves room for more than one interpretation. Families who once met at gatherings now exchange information in guarded fragments, wondering which child has been marked and which household may be watched. You sit near a nursery window while a lamp burns beneath drawn curtains, and the air remains still around the sleeping child. The kettle cools without being poured, leaving a faint metallic scent in the adjoining room. Distant footsteps pass along the garden path, then fade beneath the rustle of leaves. In another home, a different infant lies beneath another blanket, surrounded by another set of anxious adults. Neville and Harry become linked in the imagination of those who fear Voldemort. Their names are repeated softly, never together for long, as if even speech might carry danger. James and Lily Potter are members of the Order of the Phoenix, and their opposition to Voldemort places them within the same broad circle of resistance as the Longbottoms. Their work has required secrecy, changing routes, guarded conversations, and an acceptance that friendship may bring danger to the door. You enter their home at an hour when the curtains have been drawn and the lamps reduced to a gentle glow. A kettle cools on the range, its fading warmth unnoticed beside folded baby clothes. The infant sleeps in another room while the house gathers small sounds around him. Outside, distant footsteps cross the garden path, though no visitor is visible through the fabric at the windows. Frost whitens one corner of the glass, and cold air rests against the frame. James and Lily keep their child close while the prophecy turns ordinary protection into a matter of survival. The Potters withdraw from public life with their infant son before the attack at Godric's Hollow, choosing concealment over the familiar movement of friends, work, and open roads. Their disappearance is noticed by people who understand secrecy, but the reasons remain hidden from those who see only the absence. You stand inside a quiet house where chairs are covered, letters remain unopened, and the curtains stay drawn even during the afternoon. A kettle cools on the range, producing a faint ticking between voices. The garden path carries distant footsteps from the road, yet no one approaches the door. Frost whitens the window pane, turning the outside world into a blurred field of white and grey. The Potters have gone into hiding at Godric's Hollow, with their infant son sheltered within the walls. Their withdrawal is an act of love, though it leaves the wider community to interpret the silence. Godric's Hollow becomes the place where the Potters try to make a home within concealment, carrying a baby's routines into a life narrowed by fear. The village remains a point on the map, yet the Potter house is held apart from ordinary curiosity and traffic. You stand near the nursery at evening, listening to the faint movement of a child beyond the door. Curtains cover the windows before darkness has fully arrived, and the fire has settled into a low red glow. The kettle cools on the range, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a meal prepared and abandoned. Along the garden path, footsteps disturb the gravel, then stop beneath the shelter of the trees. Frost whitens the window pane whenever the night grows cold. James and Lily remain hidden with their infant son, while the names Longbottom and Potter drift through a frightened world. In the public imagination, Sirius Black becomes connected to the Potter household through friendship, secrecy, and the terrible expectation that someone must have betrayed them. He is believed to have been the Potters' secret keeper, though the arrangement had in fact been changed to Peter Pettigrew shortly before the attack. Suspicion gathers around Sirius's name before the full story can be examined. You sit beside a window in a room where the curtains have been drawn before sunset. The fire makes the nearest glass glow, while frost whitens the outer edges of the pane. A kettle cools on the range, and the metal contracting resembles a tiny, distant knock. Footsteps pass along the garden path, slowing near the hedge before continuing towards the lane. Rumor travels more quickly than evidence, moving through kitchens, offices, and crowded public houses. Sirius Black's name enters those conversations as a shape of betrayal, long before the truth has any clear form. The first accounts of the Potter's destruction at Godric's Hollow are incomplete, and incompleteness creates a space that suspicion quickly fills. People speak of a broken house, a dead couple, and an infant who survived, but the order of events remains uncertain. You hear these fragments in a parlour where a kettle cools on the range and the curtains conceal the early evening. Outside, distant footsteps cross the garden path beneath bare branches. Frost whitens the window pane, softening the boundary between the room and the world beyond. No witness can explain every movement, every wand, or every decision made inside the Potter home. The absence of certainty does not prevent conclusions from forming. Sirius is treated as though accusation were evidence, and the public gives his name the weight of a verdict before any complete account has been established. Sirius is arrested after an apparent confrontation with Peter Pettigrew in 1981, an encounter that leaves destruction behind and makes the accusation seem convincing to those who arrive afterwards. Pettigrew is believed dead, while Sirius is taken away as the suspected traitor who delivered the Potters to Voldemort. You stand near a street where dust and smoke settle between damaged buildings, listening to voices that rise and fall with frightened certainty. The nearest windows are dark, their curtains drawn despite the broken light. Somewhere indoors, a kettle cools on a kitchen range, its quiet ticking beneath the talk. Distant footsteps move across a garden path far from the crowd, belonging to a life that has not yet learned the news. Frost whitens a pane in a neighboring house, though the day is not yet fully dark. The apparent confrontation becomes the center of a story that still contains a hidden survivor. Peter Pettigrew survives secretly by hiding in the form of a rat, remaining close to the world while escaping recognition. His concealment allows the public story to settle around Sirius, whose friendship with the Potters is recast as evidence of treachery. You picture a small animal moving through cupboards, drains, sheds, and neglected corners, carrying a human secret beneath ordinary fur. In a nearby kitchen, curtains are drawn before sunset, and a kettle cools on the range beside a bowl left for washing. Distant footsteps travel along a garden path, passing over frozen ground with a faint, brittle sound. Frost whitens the window pane, while the room beyond stays warm enough for breath to disappear. Pettigrew's hidden life continues beneath the surface of the community. His name is absent from public mourning, even as his betrayal remains active within the story. Sirius Black becomes a symbol of betrayal in the public imagination, shaped by grief, fear, and the need to give a terrible event a human cause. The public believes he betrayed the Potters, and the belief grows stronger because the real betrayer has disappeared from sight. You move through a street where shopkeepers lower their voices whenever Sirius is mentioned. Curtains are drawn before sunset in the homes along the road, and each window reflects the dim movement of lamps. A kettle cools on a kitchen range behind one closed door, while the medicinal smell of St. Mungo's clings to a cloak carried past another. Distant footsteps sound on a garden path, then become indistinguishable from the wind. Frost whitens a window pane in a house where a newspaper lies folded beside the fire. Sirius is no longer merely a man in the public story, but a name made to contain anger, mourning, and certainty. The Longbottoms and the Potters are separated by circumstance, yet their families remain bound together by the prophecy, resistance, and the damage left after Voldemort's disappearance. Neville grows without the parents who once protected him, while Harry grows without James and Lily, and neither child can understand the silence around his birth. You stand in a room where a child's belongings have been kept carefully, though the people who use them are absent. The curtains are drawn before sunset, and frost whitens the window pane above the quiet hearth. A kettle cools on the range, giving the kitchen a small domestic rhythm. Farther away, footsteps move along a garden path, perhaps belonging to a relative carrying news, perhaps to nobody at all. The medicinal smell of St. Mungo's belongs to Frank and Alice, while Godric's hollow remains fixed around the Potter's final night. At St. Mungo's Hospital, Frank and Alice live within wards where time is measured by medicines, meals, visiting hours, and the movement of healers. Their condition is permanent, and the hospital becomes the place where their names continue in the care of others. You walk beside a bed beneath curtains drawn before sunset, though the high windows still admit the last color of the sky. The medicinal smell settles into the sheets, the floorboards, and the wool of your imagined coat. A kettle cools on a staff kitchen range beyond the ward, sending muted clicks through the corridor. Distant footsteps pass over polished stone, never quite entering the room. Frost whitens the nearest window pane, turning the hospital grounds into a pale, indistinct garden. Frank and Alice remain present, yet the lives they led before the attack have become unreachable. Neville carries the Longbottom name into the following decade, while the adults around him preserve fragments of what happened without possessing every answer. The prophecy remains part of the background, and the attack on his parents remains connected to a vanished enemy whose followers have not all been found. You are near a family hearth where old papers rest beneath a weighted box and a child's shoes stand beside the door. Curtains are drawn before sunset, as if daylight itself has become an unreliable guest. A kettle cools on the range, leaving the room scented with iron, ash, and yesterday's tea. Outside, distant footsteps pass along the garden path beneath branches stripped by winter. Frost whitens the window pane in a thin veil that blurs the nearest fence. Neville was born in 1980, a date remembered alongside a prophecy that may have changed two children's lives before either could speak. The question of why Voldemort chose the Potters remains entangled with the question of why the Longbottoms were attacked. Both families were considered possible targets, and both households carried children who might have matched Trelawney's prophecy. You stand between two imagined homes, joined by the same season of fear and divided by different endings. One house rests near Godric's Hollow, while another name is carried through the wards of St. Mungo's. Curtains close before sunset in both places, and frost whitens each window pane. A kettle cools on each range, though no one in either household has much appetite for tea. Distant footsteps move along separate paths, one towards a hidden door and another towards a hospital entrance. The names Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom are repeated in quiet rooms, carrying the uncertainty of two possible children and the weight of one destructive prophecy. By 1994, the public has lived with the accepted story for more than a decade, and Sirius Black's supposed betrayal has become part of common memory. Peter Pettigrew remains hidden in the form of a rat, while the truth about his betrayal has not been publicly established. You enter a house where old newspapers lie beneath a folded scarf, their pages softened by repeated handling and years of dust. Curtains are drawn before sunset, though the afternoon is still pale beyond the glass. A kettle cools on the range, surrounded by cups that have waited too long to be filled. Distant footsteps pass along the garden path and disappear behind the wall. Frost whitens the window pane, carrying the room into a muted landscape of branches and dim roofs. The names Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew remain fixed within a story that is wrong at its center, though almost no one can yet see the error. The truth about Pettigrew's betrayal is not publicly established until 1994, when the buried account begins to emerge from the confusion surrounding the Potters' deaths. Until then, the surviving families carry unanswered questions through school years, hospital visits, anniversaries, and ordinary conversations. You stand beside a table where a candle has burned low, leaving wax gathered around its base like frozen water. The curtains are drawn before sunset, and the last grey light rests across the floor. A kettle cools on the range, ticking quietly beneath the voices of those who still remember. Distant footsteps cross the garden path, while frost whitens a window pane above the sink. The medicinal smell of St. Mungo's returns in memory, connecting the Longbottoms to the same long aftermath. Godric's Hollow remains a place of loss, and the name Sirius Black still waits beneath the burden, of an incomplete truth. The surviving families learn to keep their doors closed, not because every visitor carries danger, but because the difference between safety and threat has become difficult to judge. A knock may bring a friend, an official, a rumor, or another message from the war that refuses to remain in the past. You stand in a narrow hallway with one hand near the latch and the other resting against the cool wall. Curtains are drawn in the rooms behind you, and frost whitens the window pane beside the staircase. The kettle on the kitchen range has cooled to silence. Distant footsteps move along the garden path, growing louder, then softer, then absent. The medicinal smell of St. Mungo's seems to linger in the wool of a visitor's cloak, while the distant memory of Godric's Hollow settles into the quiet. Around you, the house waits without deciding whether the night has ended. The First Wizarding War has affected magical families and the wider wizarding community alike, leaving its mark upon homes that were attacked and homes that merely listened. The Death Eaters used murder, torture, and intimidation to make uncertainty feel like permanent weather. You remain beside the closed door while the house darkens beyond the drawn curtains. A kettle cools on the range, and the scent of extinguished fire rests beneath the air. Along the garden path, distant footsteps pass without haste, softened by frozen earth. Frost whitens the window pane, turning every outside shape into a pale suggestion. The Longbottoms, the Potters, Neville, Harry, Sirius, and Pettigrew remain connected by events whose meanings were not understood at the time. Their names drift through the room as short, steady phrases, while the unanswered questions continue into the following decade. Near midnight, the family supper has become a memory of plates, lowered voices, and news received before anyone was ready to hear it. The table stands beneath a single lamp, its surface carrying the faint marks of cups and cutlery. You hear the final movement in the corridor, followed by the soft click of a latch, settling into place. Curtains remain closed, and the house keeps the world beyond its walls at a measured distance. The kettle on the range has cooled completely. Distant footsteps fade along the garden path, while frost whitens the window pane until moonlight appears almost solid. Far away, the medicinal smell of St. Mungo's rises around Frank and Alice, and nearer still, Godric's Hollow rests within memory. The doors remain closed through the dark hours, holding the families who survived, the families who vanished, and the questions nobody could yet answer. Rain gathers over Hogsmeade in the winter darkness of 1980, and you climb the narrow staircase above the Hog's Head with the muffled noise of the taproom beneath you. Smoke hangs below in the public room, woven with the sour scents of ale, wet wool, and old timber, while rain taps steadily against the upstairs window. Albus Dumbledore has come to interview Sybil Trelawney for a teaching post at Hogwarts, though the meeting seems unlikely to produce anything remarkable. You enter a private room where dust rests along the shelves. Candlelight trembles upon a crystal glass, and the furniture has the tired appearance of long neglect. The Hog's Head remains crowded downstairs, yet the upper chamber feels separated from the village, as though one thin ceiling has placed you beyond ordinary time. Dumbledore sits quietly with his hands folded, observing the woman before him with patient courtesy and faint uncertainty. Sybil Trelawney speaks about her ancestry, her abilities, and her connection to a famous seer, using the elaborate manner familiar to her. Her spectacles catch the candlelight whenever she turns her head, and the narrow room fills with the delicate clink of crystal against wood. The interview is nearing its end when Dumbledore rises, and the rain on the upstairs window grows suddenly louder within the silence. Then Trelawney's posture alters, and her eyes lose the restless brightness that has accompanied her ordinary conversation. Her voice changes completely, falling into a deeper register that seems to arrive from somewhere beyond the room. The hush after that altered voice settles over the furniture, the crystal glass, and the rain-streaked panes. You remain beside the wall while the woman speaks words that do not belong to the interview, carrying the weight of distant thunder. The child who is approaching comes with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, and the room seems to narrow around that sentence. The Dark Lord will mark the child as his equal, and the meaning moves through the chamber like cold air beneath a door. Born as the 7th month dies, the child will be born to those who have twice defied him, and danger gathers around the prediction. No name is spoken, no face is shown, and no clear road leads from the prophecy towards the child it describes. The voice fades after those fragments, leaving Trelawney unaware of what has passed through her mouth. Dumbledore has heard the prophecy, but another presence has listened from the shadows beyond the private room. Severus Snape, waiting in the Hog's Head, overhears part of the prophecy through the door or the thin walls above the noisy taproom. A little later, he carries what he has heard to Voldemort, and the fragment begins its quiet journey towards destruction. Below you, the tavern's smoke has thickened beneath the beams, where lamps form blurred islands of yellow through the grey air. Rain slides down the upstairs glass in narrow threads, breaking the candle's reflection into wavering fragments resembling distant stars. The crystal glass stands untouched beside Dumbledore, its rim bright whenever the flame leans towards it. Floorboards hold the warmth of many footsteps, while the shelves contain bottles, ledgers, and dust gathered through years of neglect. The room smells of damp stone and extinguished fire, with a trace of bitter drink rising from the crowded public house below. A chair creaks beneath the shifting weight of the night, although nobody appears to have moved within the chamber. Trelawney's breathing returns to its ordinary rhythm, and the changed voice seems impossible beside her familiar manner. Dumbledore looks towards the closed door, listening to faint movements beyond it, where the hidden witness has already begun to withdraw. Outside, Hogsmeade lies beneath rain, with crooked roofs shining black and narrow lanes reflecting the muted glow of windows. The prophecy has entered the world without announcement, carried through smoke, footsteps, and the wet darkness around the Hog's Head. Voldemort hears only a portion of the words, yet the fragment is sufficient to direct his attention towards a child not yet born. The prediction says that the child will arrive as the 7th month dies, a phrase that seems precise while leaving 2 lives within its reach. Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom are both born at the end of July 1980, each arriving close enough to the prophecy's boundary. Harry is born on 31 July, while Neville's birth falls near the same closing days of the 7th month. Both boys have parents who have twice defied Voldemort, and each family has already stood against the darkness more than once. Neither newborn can understand danger, destiny, bloodline, or the meaning of a voice heard in an upstairs room. Frank and Alice Longbottom hold their son within the quiet routines of an ordinary household, unaware that his name may belong to a dangerous possibility. James and Lily Potter cradle Harry in Godric's Hollow, where the village lanes remain peaceful beneath the summer sky. The 2 children possess no knowledge of one another, though the prophecy has placed them within the same uncertain pattern. Severus Snape does not know every word spoken by Trelawney, and the portion reaching Voldemort is incomplete. Yet Voldemort interprets the fragment as referring to Harry Potter, whose birth on 31 July appears to fit the timing. The Dark Lord chooses Harry as the child who may one day vanquish him, and his decision gives the prophecy a particular direction. In that choice lies a strange movement between prediction and action, because Voldemort responds to the prophecy while believing he is merely obeying it. The evening in Hogsmeade grows quieter as the tavern begins to empty, leaving wet cloaks, cooling hearthstones, and abandoned cups behind. Smoke thins beneath the rafters, revealing dark beams marked by age and the faint pale residue of years of fire. The upstairs window carries the soft percussion of rain, each drop joining the next, until the sound becomes almost continuous. A candle burns beside the crystal glass, and its flame appears doubled in the curved surface before settling again. The wooden table is rough beneath your fingertips, worn smooth along the edge where countless visitors have leaned during ordinary conversations. Dust lies undisturbed upon the shelves, forming small grey ridges around bottles untouched for many seasons. The air is cooler near the window, where dampness rises from the village roofs and enters through the imperfect frame. From below comes the slow scrape of a chair, followed by a door closing and the low murmur of the innkeeper's voice. The private room seems to hold an afterimage of the prophecy, although nothing visible remains except glass, flame, wood, and shadow. Dumbledore leaves the hogshead with the knowledge that a child may be threatened because of words spoken without conscious intention. In the months that follow, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom grow within separate homes, each surrounded by adults unaware of the full danger. The prophecy does not name Harry directly, nor does it identify Neville, leaving both boys as possible subjects. Their similarities are unsettling, since both are born at the end of July and both have parents who twice defied Voldemort. The fragment reaches Voldemort through Snape, and Voldemort's interpretation settles upon Harry rather than Neville. His decision is not merely a private conclusion, because it sends a command through the dark networks of the war. Voldemort travels towards the Potter family, carrying his belief that Harry is the child foretold. The prophecy describes a child, but the Dark Lord supplies the identity through choosing whom to attack. Harry is marked as his equal when Voldemort's curse rebounds, leaving a scar upon the infant's forehead. That mark becomes visible evidence of the encounter, though it cannot explain the hidden room, the incomplete words, or the second child. Neville Longbottom remains outside Voldemort's chosen path, and his possible place within the prophecy becomes obscured by events. In Godric's Hollow, the summer night is filled with silence after the violence, while the name Harry Potter begins to acquire legendary weight. The Longbottom household follows another course, one that will eventually lead Frank and Alice towards suffering and permanent absence. Two families have been drawn into the same prophecy, though only one child is attacked by the Dark Lord. The difference arises from Voldemort's decision, which is later understood as part of the prophecy's fulfillment. The rain has ceased over Hogsmeade, leaving the roof slick beneath the pale morning and chimney smoke rising straight into still air. Inside the hogshead, damp footprints darken the boards, and the last lamps burn weakly against the grey light. The upstairs room has lost its dramatic tension, appearing once more as a neglected chamber above an ordinary public house. A crystal glass gathers a thin reflection of dawn, with a candle beside it reduced to a small trembling wick. Dust remains upon the shelves, untouched by the momentous words that passed through the room during the previous night. The window glass is cold, and beads of rain cling to the frame before falling onto the sill. Smoke lingers in the taproom like a memory, softening the outlines of tables and making distant voices sound farther away. A chair stands slightly apart from the table, where a listener may have waited without being seen. The narrow staircase descends into the public house, carrying each footstep down towards the village and the wider world. Nothing about the room reveals that two unborn children have become possible subjects of a danger they cannot understand. Ordinary objects continue to endure, while extraordinary consequences move through homes, families, and hidden corridors. Years pass before the full significance of the prophecy is revealed to Harry, and by then the First War has become history. Harry grows beneath a scar, while Neville grows beneath a different burden, each boy shaped by events neither has chosen. The prophecy remains stored in the Department of Mysteries, sealed within the Ministry among shelves crowded with glass spheres. Its complete wording is not kept at Hogwarts or in the houses of the families it concerns, but beneath the Ministry's guarded rooms. The record exists as an object that can be touched, carried, broken, and heard, although its meaning remains difficult to possess. Harry knows only that Voldemort once sought him because of a prophecy, without yet knowing the words that began the danger. Around the prophecy, the Ministry maintains its quiet architecture of locked doors, stone passages, and offices hidden beneath ordinary government. Dust settles upon shelves in the Department of Mysteries, softening the edges of glass spheres and making the room appear almost abandoned. Pale lamps glow beneath the high ceiling, though their light seems insufficient for the endless rows of stored predictions. Each sphere carries a label, a name, or a date, and the markings wait in silence beneath thin layers of dust. The air is dry and cool, with the faint mineral scent of stone that has remained underground for generations. Glass catches the lamplight in small points, resembling distant candles seen through mist on a winter road. Beyond the shelves, doors lead towards other mysteries, each threshold guarded by silence rather than visible locks. The Ministry corridors above contain voices, footsteps, documents, and official decisions, while beneath them the prophecies rest in stillness. A record may remain untouched for years, yet its words can continue shaping lives beyond the walls that contain it. Harry enters the Department of Mysteries during the events of 1996, drawn there by a vision and the belief that Sirius Black is in danger. The locked rooms become part of a struggle involving Harry, his friends, Voldemort's followers, and the machinery of the Ministry. Within the Hall of Prophecy, Harry encounters the shelf where the prediction concerning him has been stored. He does not hear the full wording until 1996, when the fragile glass sphere is removed from its place. The record speaks with a voice that seems to come from the object itself, distant and formal, yet unmistakably connected with his life. Only then does Harry hear that the child will approach with power to vanquish the Dark Lord. He hears that the child will be born as the 7th month dies, and that the parents will have twice defied Voldemort. The words also say that the Dark Lord will mark the child as his equal, though the prophecy still does not speak Harry's name. Through the complete wording, Harry understands that Neville Longbottom could have been the subject as well. The Ministry's hidden archive reveals no simple statement of identity, because the prophecy describes qualities shared by two boys. Shelves rise around you in the Hall of Prophecy, their surfaces grey beneath accumulated dust and the dim wash of enchanted light. The floor is smooth and cold, reflecting the pale shapes of glass spheres arranged in ordered rows. Labels hang from the shelves, bearing names and dates that seem ordinary until the significance of a particular record becomes clear. A faint scent of old parchment moves through the chamber, mingling with dry stone and the cool odor of sealed rooms. Glass spheres gleam in the distance, each one holding a voice that has not yet been released into the world. The air does not stir, except when figures pass between the shelves, disturbing small pockets of dust that drift slowly downwards. The darkness beyond the lamps is deep enough to conceal doors, alcoves, and the edges of the vast circular room. Every footstep seems softened by the stone, as though the Ministry has built the chamber to protect silence itself. The crystal record in Harry's hands is delicate, cool, and faintly luminous against the surrounding shelves. Its surface carries reflected shapes of lamps and faces, turning the prophecy into something both physical and strangely remote. The Department of Mysteries remains hidden beneath the Ministry, while the war above continues to change the lives of ordinary families. Dumbledore later explains in 1996 that Voldemort's choice helped bring the prophecy to fulfillment. The explanation does not erase the prophecy, but it changes the way its words can be understood. A prediction may describe a possibility, while the decisions made by living people determine which possibility becomes real. Voldemort hears of a child and chooses Harry, believing that Harry must be the one who can vanquish him. By attacking Harry, the Dark Lord marks him as his equal, creating the very condition that the prophecy describes. The mark is therefore both consequence and confirmation, formed by Voldemort's action rather than by a name spoken in the prophecy. Harry's scar becomes the visible sign of a choice made by someone else before Harry can speak or understand. Neville remains the second possible child, and his life continues under a different pattern of loss, courage, and resistance. The prophecy has not forced every detail of the future, because neither boy is compelled to fulfill it in exactly the same manner. Dumbledore's explanation leaves room for uncertainty, responsibility, and the difficult freedom belonging to those who make choices. Within the Ministry, the shelves continue into darkness, and dust gathers quietly along their lower edges. A thin film covers the stone beneath the records, disturbed only by officials, researchers, or intruders. Lamps burn without warmth, casting pale circles across the floor and leaving the upper shelves almost invisible. The stillness resembles a library after midnight, except that every volume has been replaced by a fragile sphere of stored speech. Some glass reflects a colorless blue, while other pieces hold only the dull brown of dust and distant wood. The room seems colder near the walls, where ancient stone absorbs the faint vibration of the Ministry above. A soft resonance travels through the hall of prophecy when a record is handled, like a note heard beneath the threshold of sleep. The labels hang motionless, carrying names that belong to people living far away from this underground chamber. The hidden room in the Hog's Head and the hidden archive beneath the Ministry are connected by words, though no corridor joins them. One room holds the beginning of the prophecy, while the other preserves its complete form within glass. The rain on the Hogsmeade window has long dried, yet its rhythm remains part of the memory surrounding the original event. Harry has heard the full wording, but hearing it does not resolve every question concerning fate and intention. The prophecy did not name Harry directly, and its language remains broad enough to include Neville Longbottom. Both boys were born at the end of July 1980, and both had parents who twice defied Voldemort. The resemblance between their circumstances is what allows the prophecy to remain uncertain. Voldemort's interpretation separates them, transforming one child into a target and leaving the other outside the immediate attack. Snape's overheard fragment begins the chain, although he does not deliver the complete prophecy to the Dark Lord. A partial truth can provoke a complete catastrophe when it reaches someone determined to act upon it. The fragment travels through Snape to Voldemort, crossing hidden rooms, guarded thresholds, and the private distances of the First War. Harry's later understanding depends upon recovering the words that existed before his birth on 31 July. The year 1980 remains fixed at the center of the story, joining Trelawney's interview with the births of two boys. The date, the place, and the prophecy recur through memory, as though the past requires several paths before it can be reached. The Ministry archive rests under a ceiling of stone, where dust softens every shelf and lamps shine with patient restraint. Cold air lies close to the floor, carrying the faint smell of metal from distant corridors and the dry scent of old paper. The shelves rise in curves, suggesting that knowledge can be measured, catalogued, and hidden without being understood. Glass spheres catch the light whenever you pass them, creating brief pinpricks of brightness among the shadows. Some records appear clouded from within, while others remain clear enough to show only a pale interior glow. Dust rests on labels, brackets, and the narrow seams where shelf and wall meet. The silence is not empty, since the stone seems to retain echoes from every voice spoken beneath the Ministry. A door closes far away, and the sound travels through the chamber with muted, almost ceremonial finality. The air around the prophecy feels no different from the air around the others, making its importance depend entirely upon its words. The full record remains an object among objects, waiting until a particular hand removes it from the shelf. Above the Department of Mysteries, the Ministry continues its work, while the war turns towards its final and most dangerous phase. Harry carries the knowledge of the prophecy back into a world where names, loyalties, and choices have already been altered. He understands that Voldemort could have chosen Neville, because both boys fitted the description given in 1980. He understands that the Dark Lord's decision helped create the equality described by Trelawney's changed voice. He also understands that the prophecy cannot be separated from the actions surrounding it, especially those of people who believe it. Dumbledore's account presents fate as something less rigid than a command and more troubling than a simple prediction. The words foretell an approach, a power, a birth, and a mark, but they do not prescribe every movement that follows. Voldemort supplies the attack, Harry survives it, and the scar becomes the quiet beginning of a conflict lasting many years. Neville's possible place remains part of the story, even though Voldemort never marks him as his equal. The children are not responsible for the prophecy, nor for the choices made by adults who hear fragments of it. Their lives begin beneath a meaning imposed upon them, while the wider world continues with births, meals, weather, and sleep. The upstairs room above the Hogshead returns to its ordinary condition, but its forgotten conversation continues to move through history. The rain begins again across Hogsmeade, fine and steady, touching the window with a softer pattern than before. Smoke settles low in the taproom, where the fire has burned down and the benches stand in pools of amber light. A crystal glass waits upon the upstairs table, its surface catching the candle's reflection before the flame fades. The shelves remain dusty, and the room holds the quiet smell of timber, damp stone, and old drink. Nothing disturbs the chair where Dumbledore sat listening, although the memory of the changed voice seems to occupy it. The ceiling carries faint vibrations from the public house below, where cups are placed down and doors open onto the lane. Rainwater slips from the eaves, falling in a measured stream beside the narrow window. The village is dark beyond the glass, with only occasional lamps glowing through curtains and wet branches. This ordinary weather surrounds an extraordinary beginning, just as the Ministry's dust surrounds the prophecy without revealing its importance. Two hidden rooms preserve the history, one where the words first formed, and one where the full wording remained locked away. Between them lies the life of Harry Potter, the life of Neville Longbottom, and the decision made by Voldemort. The story returns to the Hogshead in Hogsmeade, to the interview in 1980, and to the voice that was not Trelawney's ordinary voice. It returns to the births at the end of July, to Harry's birth on 31 July, and to the parents who had twice defied Voldemort. It returns to Severus Snape, who overheard part of the prophecy and passed what he heard to the Dark Lord. It returns to Voldemort's interpretation, which settled upon Harry and gave the old words a living direction. The prophecy remains incomplete in the mind of anyone who hears only a fragment, and fragments can carry more danger than certainty. Harry hears the full wording during the events of 1996, when the Department of Mysteries opens its hidden shelves to the violence of the war. The record does not call him by name, and the absence of that name remains important. Neville could have stood within the same description, sharing the month, the family history, and the possibility of vanquishing the Dark Lord. The future therefore grows from both language and choice, from what is spoken and from what living people decide to do. Dumbledore understands this difference, and in 1996 he offers it to Harry as a way of seeing the past. The Ministry's underground rooms become still again after the conflict, while the shelves retain their dust and silent labels. The cold floor reflects the lamps in broken shapes, and the upper darkness gathers above the circular walls. A distant mechanical hum passes through the stone, perhaps from lifts, pipes, or offices continuing their work far overhead. The scent of parchment remains faint but persistent, mixed with the dry mineral smell of a place sealed from daylight. Glass spheres gleam along the shelves, each one holding a possible future or a voice that has already shaped a life. Dust drifts slowly where the air moves, settling again upon the brackets and the lower edges of the records. No rain reaches the department of mysteries, yet the memory of rain on the hogshead window belongs to the same history. The two atmospheres meet in thought, wet village darkness above, dry ministry silence below, and prophecy between them. A candle in the hogsmeade room and a lamp beneath the ministry both give light to words that cannot protect anyone by themselves. The hush after Trelawney's altered voice and the hush around the stored prophecy possess the same patient depth. One silence follows revelation, while the other waits for revelation to be heard. In each place, an ordinary object remains nearby, indifferent to the weight of the events unfolding around it. The crystal glass, the dusty shelf, the rain-marked window, and the quiet lamp become small anchors within a much larger story. You leave the department of mysteries with the understanding that the prophecy is still only one part of the explanation. Harry has been marked because Voldemort chose him, and that choice helped bring the words to fulfillment. The conclusion does not make the prophecy harmless, since the fragment began the sequence of fear and violence. The child born as the 7th month died has grown into a young wizard carrying a history older than his own memories. The Dark Lord has marked him as his equal, yet equality is not the same as identity, power, or certainty. The child with the power to vanquish Voldemort could have been Harry or Neville, and that uncertainty belongs permanently to the past. Only one fragment was overheard by Snape, only one interpretation was carried to Voldemort, and only one child was attacked. In the private room above the hogshead, Trelawney's changed voice fades into ordinary silence. Under the ministry, the full prophecy rests once more among dusty shelves, its glass surface reflecting the low light. The war continues beyond both rooms, but the clue that helped shape it remains locked away from common sight. Rain moves across the Hogsmeade window, smoke settles in the taproom, and the crystal glass grows dim as evening returns. The stone beneath the ministry remains cool, while dust gathers patiently around records that no living hand has disturbed. Two newborn boys sleep in distant homes, untouched by the prophecy's language and unaware of the fear surrounding their names. Harry Potter rests in Godric's Hollow, and Neville Longbottom rests beneath another roof, while the year 1980 passes into memory. The doors of the hidden rooms remain closed through the night, holding the voices, choices, and silences that shaped the years ahead. By the final months of the First Wizarding War, Harry Potter was still an infant, carried through each day by the quiet routines of a small household and the unseen pressures of a country under threat. James Potter and Lily Evans had married before Harry's birth, joining their lives while the conflict darkened the wizarding world around them. Their home stood in Godric's Hollow, in the West Country, where the village held a significant wizarding population and a long association with wizarding history. Late summer grass lay around the cottage in pale green folds, bending beneath the evening wind and shining where the low sunlight touched it. Beyond the garden wall, leaves moved along the village lane, turning softly across the dust before gathering beside a gate. The air carried the faint scent of earth, timber, and rain waiting beyond the hills. Near the hearth, small baby blankets dried upon a wooden rail, their woven edges trembling whenever the fire breathed. Somewhere within the cottage, a clock measured the slow passage of another hour. James and Lily had both joined the Order of the Phoenix, and their days were divided between caring for their child and serving a war that reached into every friendship. They had defied Voldemort 3 times before their deaths, each act adding weight to the prophecy that few people fully understood. Their names passed between frightened households and guarded rooms in whispers. The cottage settled beneath the late summer sky, its walls warmed by the last amber light. A door closed against the rain, leaving the inner rooms hushed and close. Small socks rested beside the hearth, and a folded blanket held the fire's fading warmth. Rain brushed the windows with a delicate, uneven rhythm, while wet leaves shifted along the lane outside. For James and Lily, ordinary life had become an act of courage. They prepared meals, washed clothing, and carried Harry from one quiet room to another, while messages from the Order brought news of disappearances, attacks, and names spoken in lowered voices. Harry had been born on 31 July 1980, and within a few months his first year was passing beneath the shadow of a conflict he could not comprehend. Godric's Hollow gave the Potters a place where history seemed to lie close beneath the surface of daily life. Old houses leaned towards narrow streets, and familiar paths connected families whose names had been remembered for generations. The village offered companionship and concealment, yet remained quiet enough for a young family to imagine that safety could be made from stone, wood, and routine. By dusk, the grass around the cottage darkened into soft blue-green, and the garden became a border between the house and the wider country. Moisture rested on the leaves, catching the final light like small pieces of glass. From the lane came the faint scrape of branches against a wall, followed by distant footsteps. A kettle cooled beside the fire, releasing a thin metallic smell, while the baby blankets near the hearth slowly dried. The war widened, and the Potters understood that courage alone could no longer keep danger away. Their defiance had made them visible to Voldemort, while their connection to the Order placed them within reach of enemies and informers. Harry was too young to be moved through dangerous countryside without risk, so the cottage had become both refuge and burden. A protection was needed that could separate the Potters from everyone searching for them. The answer was the Fidelius charm, an ancient and difficult form of concealment built around one secret and one trusted friend. The charm hid the location by placing its secret within a living person, making the address inaccessible to anyone who had not received it directly from the keeper. The rain softened over the roof, and a thin line of firelight rested beneath the door. Within the cottage, the walls held the smell of ash, wool, and milk warmed in a small saucepan. Harry's blankets gave off the gentle scent of clean linen, while drops gathered on the window and slid slowly down the glass. Along the lane, leaves shifted in shallow circles, carried by a breeze threading between the old houses. The Fidelius charm offered no visible barrier, no wall of light, and no sound that passing neighbors could hear. It transformed knowledge into a locked chamber, with the address held within a living soul rather than written on paper or spoken into the air. Those who had not been told the secret could stand near the hidden home and remain unable to find it. Sirius Black had originally been considered for the role of secret keeper. He was James's closest friend, a member of the Order, and someone whose loyalty seemed beyond question. The arrangement appeared sensible, especially because Sirius was expected to remain near the Potters and could be trusted with the responsibility. In the outward shape of the plan, he appeared to hold the secret. Night gathered above Godric's Hollow, drawing color from the cottage garden and leaving the grass silver beneath the clouds. The rain became a fine whisper against the windows, while the door remained closed against the damp evening air. A small lamp glowed beside the chair where Lily had rested with Harry, and the baby blankets cast folded shadows across the floor. From the lane came the occasional rustle of leaves, turning over one another like quiet pages. Shortly before their deaths, the Potters changed the plan. Peter Pettigrew was chosen as secret keeper, while Sirius continued to appear responsible for the concealment. The alteration was kept quiet, perhaps because the original arrangement seemed too obvious, or because secrecy had become the only protection the Potters could still control. James and Lily believed the change would send their enemies in the wrong direction. Sirius could remain a visible target, drawing suspicion towards himself, while Peter held the true secret. The protection depended upon the secret remaining with its keeper, and the Potters trusted Pettigrew with the location of their home. The village lay beneath a damp darkness, and the cottage windows reflected only small pools of firelight. Water tapped from the eaves onto the stones beside the garden path. The late summer grass gave off a cool, green fragrance, mingled with faint hearth smoke. A blanket lay across the back of a chair, its corner touching the floor, while the clock counted each second with calm precision. Sirius and Dumbledore did not know that Pettigrew had become secret keeper. Sirius accepted the appearance of the role, allowing the world to believe that the secret rested with him. Dumbledore understood the dangers of the charm and Voldemort's methods, but remained unaware of the last-minute alteration. Within the house, Peter's quiet presence seemed unremarkable. He had known James, Lily, and Sirius for years, sharing their school days, their jokes, and the dangers of the Order. He could enter their rooms without ceremony, sit near the hearth, and speak softly while Harry slept nearby. In retrospect, that familiarity became the most dangerous detail in the house's history. Morning came pale through the cloud, leaving the cottage damp with the smell of rain. Droplets gathered on every blade of grass, and the leaves along the lane clung to the stones. Baby blankets hung near the hearth, warmed slowly by the fire after the wet night. A wooden spoon rested beside a bowl, and the faint scent of porridge lingered in the kitchen. The Fidelius charm protected the address from those who had not been told the secret. Voldemort could search the West Country, question families, and pass through Godric's Hollow without finding the cottage by ordinary means. The house was protected by the difference between being near a place and knowing where it was. Yet the charm could not guard against the person who carried its secret. It trusted the living soul that held the address, but could not measure fear, ambition, resentment, or the desire to survive. Its magic was exact. The human choice within it remained uncertain. The fire burned low during the afternoon, sending a warm scent of charcoal through the rooms. Outside, sunlight moved across the wet garden in broken patches, and a draught lifted the edge of one blanket before allowing it to fall. The village lane remained quiet, except for leaves nudged by the wind beneath the hedges. Beyond the cottage walls, rain gathered again over the West Country. Peter Pettigrew betrayed the secret to Voldemort. No visible sign announced the act, and no protective wall collapsed around the cottage. Somewhere beyond Godric's Hollow, Voldemort received the information he needed and learned the address that the charm had hidden from every uninformed searcher. The secret had crossed from Pettigrew's keeping into Voldemort's knowledge, and the cottage became a place that could be found through betrayal. The protection remained effective against strangers, neighbors, and wandering enemies, but it could no longer conceal the home from the person who had been told its location. Rain returned as evening approached, sliding in long threads down the windows. Harry's blankets dried once more beside the flames, carrying the clean smell of linen and smoke. On the mantel, the clock marked the darkening hour with quiet ticking. Outside, leaves pressed against the edges of the stones before the wind carried them onward. James and Lily continued within the hidden house, unaware that the secret had already been surrendered. Their daily gestures remained gentle and familiar. James crossed a room, Lily adjusted Harry's blanket, and the cottage held the small sounds of a family believing that its shelter still existed. The house in Godric's Hollow had become difficult to find, but it had not become unreachable. Its protection depended upon the distinction between secrecy and silence, and Pettigrew's betrayal erased that distinction for Voldemort. The hidden address now rested in the mind of the most dangerous wizard of the age. Moonlight entered through a break in the clouds, silvering the garden stones and the wet tips of the grass. The hedges released the smell of rain-soaked leaves, while the lane beyond them shone faintly beneath the dark sky. Inside, the fire drew thin orange lines across the floorboards. A folded shawl lay near the chair, and the baby blankets had cooled at their edges. The Potters had tried to make a small home in the middle of a widening war. They had married before Harry's birth, joined the Order of the Phoenix, and defied Voldemort 3 times before their deaths. Their courage existed beside laundry, meals, tiredness, and a child sleeping in the next room. Harry rested in Godric's Hollow, while the last months of the First Wizarding War moved towards their darkest point. His infancy passed beneath the protection of a secret, though he knew nothing of the charm, the keeper, or the betrayal that had opened the way. The cottage stood quietly among the late summer fields, its roof darkened by rain, and its chimney breathing a narrow veil of smoke. Grass leaned against the garden wall, wet enough to shine whenever the clouds thinned. A loose leaf travelled along the lane and came to rest near the gate. The hearth warmed the drying blankets, and the smell of wool mingled with ash. For Sirius Black, the apparent burden of the secret would soon become part of a terrible misunderstanding. He had allowed the world to believe that he was the keeper, while the true secret remained with Peter Pettigrew. When the cottage was discovered, Sirius's apparent responsibility would seem to explain the betrayal, even though he and Dumbledore did not know the truth. The final danger did not come from the village, the ministry, or an accidental breach in the charm. It came from a friend who had stood close enough to know the house, enter its rooms, and carry its address within him. Wind moved through the trees beyond Godric's Hollow, bringing a deeper chill across the fields. The rain had stopped, but water still fell from branch to branch in patient intervals. Along the lane, leaves scraped lightly over the ground and gathered beside the cottages. Harry's blankets rested near the hearth, one corner glowing faintly in the firelight. Voldemort now possessed the information required to reach the Potters. The Fidelius charm still concealed their location from anyone who had not been told, but Voldemort had been told by Peter Pettigrew. The secret no longer protected the family from him because its purpose had been defeated through the Keeper's choice. The protected cottage could be found through betrayal. No map showed the house, no ordinary search revealed its path, and no passerby understood what stood beyond the hidden boundary. The address existed within the living world, yet remained absent from the knowledge of those who had not received it. Dawn returned slowly over the West Country, turning the clouds from black to grey and the grass from silver to green. The garden smelled of wet soil and late flowers, while a faint breeze carried leaves along the lane. Near the hearth, the blankets had dried completely, their folds holding the fire's warmth. The clock ticked through the dim room, and the closed door waited beneath the pressure of morning. Godric's Hollow remained an old wizarding place, with its significant wizarding population and long association with wizarding history. Its lanes had held generations of footsteps, and its houses had watched families rise and fall. Within that landscape, James and Lily had tried to preserve a small space for Harry, trusting that the charm and its keeper would hold. The arrangement had seemed carefully made. Sirius Black stood as the apparent keeper, Peter Pettigrew carried the hidden truth, and Dumbledore remained outside the final knowledge of the plan. Yet the design rested upon loyalty, and loyalty could not be created by magic alone. By late afternoon, mild light spread over the cottage garden, warming the stones beside the path. The grass lifted after the rain, and tiny beads of water remained along the fence. Leaves moved lazily along the lane, accompanied by the distant creak of a gate. Inside, the hearth gave off a dry, comforting heat, while the clock continued its quiet rhythm. The Potter's hiding place was no longer entirely hidden. Voldemort knew the address because Pettigrew had betrayed the secret, and that knowledge gave him a direct path through the protection. What remained around the cottage was not a shield against the informed enemy, but a barrier against everyone else. James and Lily did not yet know that the danger had changed its nature. They had guarded against discovery by force, surveillance, and ordinary acts of concealment. The final weakness lay in the human heart of the charm, where one friend had been trusted and one secret had been placed. The evening air cooled the garden, drawing the scent of grass and damp wood towards the house. A faint line of smoke rose from the chimney and dissolved into the blue-grey sky. Within the sitting room, firelight touched the edges of Harry's blankets, while shadows gathered beneath the furniture. Only a few drops had begun to fall, and leaves moved along the lane in slow, scattered paths. Harry Potter slept in Godric's Hollow, born on 31 July 1980 into a family shaped by love, war, and resistance. James and Lily Potter had made their home there because the village offered history, community, and the possibility of remaining unseen. They had defied Voldemort 3 times and trusted one friend with the secret of their shelter. Peter Pettigrew had carried that secret away. Voldemort had learned where the Potters were hiding, and the Fidelius charm could no longer prevent him from finding them. The cottage remained invisible to those who had not been told, but its hiddenness now depended upon a truth that had already been broken. Night settled over the West Country, softening the outline of the cottage and laying darkness across the garden. The late summer grass held the last warmth of the day, while wet leaves along the lane shone beneath the moon. A small fire moved quietly in the hearth, warming the blankets left nearby. The air inside smelled of ash, clean cloth, and rain. The Potter's story now rested upon a narrow interval between knowledge and arrival. Voldemort possessed the address, though most of the wizarding world remained unaware. Sirius believed the apparent arrangement still served its purpose, and Dumbledore did not know that Peter had become secret keeper. In the hidden cottage, James and Lily remained with their infant son, while danger approached through a path opened by betrayal. Godric's Hollow was quiet beneath the clouds, its old lanes dark between the houses. Leaves scraped over the stones, paused against the garden wall, and shifted again when the wind changed. The cottage windows showed a low amber glow, and the door held back the coolness of the evening. Near the hearth, the baby blankets lay folded and still. The Fidelius charm had done precisely what it was made to do. It concealed the location by placing the secret inside a living person and protected the address from those who had not been told. No ordinary observer could simply stumble upon the cottage, even while walking through the same village. But Peter Pettigrew had been told, and Voldemort had learned the secret from him. That was enough. The cottage could be found through betrayal, and the betrayal had already taken place. Rain began again beyond the fields, light at first, then more settled against the roofs of Godric's Hollow. The grass around the cottage darkened beneath the water, releasing the deep scent of soil. Leaves brushed against one another along the lane with a soft, papery sound. Inside, the hearth brightened the room where the blankets dried, while the clocks ticking passed beneath the rain. James and Lily had built their protection around one secret and one trusted friend. They had tried to make a family life within a war that had made privacy precious and trust dangerous. Their marriage, their membership in the Order of the Phoenix, and their 3 acts of defiance had placed them in Voldemort's path long before Harry could understand the meaning of his own name. Now, Harry slept, while the final months of the First Wizarding War narrowed around him. His home in Godric's Hollow remained hidden from the uninformed world, but Voldemort knew where to look. The address was safe from strangers and open to the betrayer's master. The last warmth of the day faded from the stones outside, leaving the garden calm beneath a veil of rain. The late summer grass bent evenly in the wind, and water trembled along the hedge leaves. A folded blanket rested near the hearth, its woolen surface catching a faint glow from the embers. The clock continued its gentle ticking as the lane carried leaves into darkness. Within the cottage, the Potter's small household remained suspended between protection and danger. The walls held the traces of meals, conversation, and sleep, while Harry's blankets rested close to the fire. Somewhere beyond the village, Voldemort moved with the knowledge Peter had given him. The secret had passed from a living soul into a waiting mind. Godric's Hollow lay silent around them, old enough to have witnessed many forms of courage and many kinds of loss. The house that could not be found by searching had become visible through treachery. The Fidelius charm still kept the address from those who had not received the secret, but Voldemort no longer belonged to that number. The clock ticked beneath the rain, the hearth softened the chill, and leaves continued to move along the village lane. In the cottage, Harry Potter slept near his parents while the year 1980 drew towards its final and terrible hours. Night settles over Godric's Hollow on 31 October 1981, and the Halloween wind moves softly through the bare branches beside the hidden cottage. The village lies beneath a darkening sky, its narrow lanes silvered by rain, while distant windows hold small, golden squares of lamplight. You are standing among the quiet trees above the valley, where wet leaves cling to the earth and cold air moves across your face. A low wind passes over the roofs, carrying the scent of damp stone, extinguished fires, and leaves gathered beneath garden walls. Beyond the village, the fields fade into darkness, and the old churchyard stones glimmer whenever the clouds thin above the west country. The cottage cannot be found by ordinary searching, for the Fidelius charm still conceals its address from everyone who has not received the secret. Yet treachery has carried that secret into Voldemort's hands, and he now approaches Godric's Hollow beneath the autumn night. No lantern marks his way, and no hurried footsteps announce his arrival. The danger has already crossed the threshold of secrecy. Within the small house, James and Lily Potter remain close to their infant son, unaware that Voldemort has learned their location and come to the door. Rain gathers on the window panes, making candlelight tremble across the glass, while somewhere outside a branch rubs gently against the roof. Harry sleeps in the room above, wrapped in the quiet warmth of the house, with the ordinary peace of infancy resting over his face. The night gives no warning in words, but its stillness seems to draw inward, as though the village itself has become attentive. Voldemort has arrived after learning where the Potters are hidden, and the final movement of the war begins without witnesses. James hears the disturbance and moves towards the danger, attempting to delay Voldemort long enough for Lily to protect Harry. He has no wand in his hand when Voldemort confronts him, leaving him only his body, his courage, and a few precious moments. James Potter dies first, standing between the attacker and the rooms where his wife and child are waiting. His effort cannot stop Voldemort, yet it creates the brief interval upon which Lily and Harry's fate will turn. In the house, footsteps strike the floorboards, a door gives way, and the Halloween wind enters through a broken opening. Lily reaches Harry, and the distance between mother and child becomes the entire remaining world. Voldemort advances through the ruined cottage, certain that the victory he has pursued for years is now close enough to touch. The lamps have gone out, leaving the rooms filled with shadows, splintered wood, broken plaster, and cold night air. Fragments of glass rest along the floor, catching the faint light that slips through the windows from the clouded sky. A curtain lifts and settles beside the wall, brushing the sill with a dry whisper as the wind moves through the open room. Somewhere in the village, water drips from a gutter in a slow rhythm, while the trees bend and recover beyond the garden. The air carries the clean bitterness of rain, mingled with the dusty smell released from plaster broken by violence. Harry's room remains small and pale, with a cot, a blanket, and the soft breathing of a child too young to understand fear. Lily stands there while Voldemort enters, and every ordinary object becomes sharply visible beneath the terrible pressure of that moment. He gives Lily Potter the opportunity to step aside, because his purpose is Harry, and he expects her to surrender the child. She refuses to abandon Harry, choosing to remain between him and the curse, even when no rescue can reach the cottage. The refusal changes the meaning of the attack, transforming murder into a sacrifice freely made for another life. Lily Potter is killed before Voldemort turns his wand upon Harry, and her final act becomes protection that Voldemort cannot understand. Outside, the garden path lies dark beneath the rain, its stones slick with fallen leaves and its hedges bowed by the wind. The bare branches lift against the sky like thin black lines, while loose leaves scrape across the paving before settling near the gate. Inside the cottage, silence grows between one breath and the next, interrupted only by the faint creak of timber under strain. Cold air passes through the broken walls, touching the curtains and carrying the scent of wet earth from the garden. The room seems suspended beneath the storm, with a small cot standing in darkness and shattered plaster whitening the floor. A drop of rain slips from the eaves and falls into the flower bed, where the soil has softened beneath the October weather. The village remains unaware, its chimneys quiet and its windows glowing steadily, while the cottage holds the secret center of the night. No bell sounds from the church, and no neighbor crosses the lane. The danger has come too quickly for human interruption. Even the wind appears to pause, leaving only the distant rustle of branches along the slopes beyond Godric's Hollow. Voldemort casts the killing curse at Harry, expecting the green light to end the life of the child before him. The curse strikes the protection created by Lily's voluntary sacrifice, and the force of the spell turns back upon its caster. A sudden green flash fills the room, brighter than lightning and sharper than ordinary fire, before darkness falls across the wreckage. The curse rebounds when it meets the love Lily has given freely, and Voldemort loses his physical body in the instant of reversal. His presence vanishes from public view, leaving neither a fallen figure nor a clear explanation of what has occurred. Harry survives, marked by a lightning-shaped scar upon his forehead and protected by the sacrifice that has altered the course of history. The cottage cannot contain the violence of the magic, and its walls split open as stone and plaster fall into the rooms below. Outside, the Halloween wind returns through the bare branches, carrying dust from the house across the garden path and into the dark. Rain touches the broken roof, gathering in small streams along the exposed beams before falling through the rooms in scattered drops. The air has become colder, and the smell of smoke, wet earth, and powdered plaster hangs beneath the open sky. A piece of timber shifts with a tired groan, then settles beside the doorway, where mud has collected beneath the ruined threshold. The green flash has gone, but a pale afterimage seems to remain in the eye, like the memory of distant lightning. Beyond the garden, the village road lies empty, with leaves turning slowly in shallow pools formed by the autumn rain. Harry's crying begins within the wreckage, small and persistent beneath the wide silence, reaching into the night without being answered. The sound rises from the broken room where Lily had stood, becoming the first living note after the curse has passed. No one in the village yet understands that the war has changed, or that power has shifted inside one damaged house. In the hours that follow, the cottage remains exposed beneath the stars, its hidden existence made visible by fire, ruin, and absence. Hagrid reaches the cottage after receiving Dumbledore's instructions, and his great form appears beyond the garden wall beneath the rain. He finds Harry alive among the wreckage and gathers the infant carefully, holding him against the broad warmth of his coat. The giant's arms are heavy with strength, yet his movements become gentle as he lifts the child from the ruined room. Broken glass gleams beneath his boots, and water runs along the path in thin channels between the stones. Hagrid carries Harry away from the wreckage, leaving the cottage open to the cold October night. His heavy footsteps sound along the garden path, each one pressing into the wet earth before lifting with deliberate weight. The trees lean over him, their bare branches dripping steadily, while the child's cries rise and fall against the rain. Above the village, clouds part briefly, revealing a few dim stars before darkness closes over them again. The path leads towards the boundary of Godric's Hollow, where hedges divide the gardens, and the lane bends towards sleeping houses. Harry's small face rests against Hagrid's coat, protected from the wind by wool leather, and the giant's careful embrace. Behind them, the ruined cottage grows smaller among the trees, its broken plaster pale against the deep colors of night. Sirius Black arrives at the cottage after the attack, finding the garden disturbed and the house open to the weather. He asks Hagrid to give Harry to him, believing that the child should remain with someone who belongs to the world he has lost. The request comes through the darkness beside the ruined home, where Lily and James can no longer answer for their son. Hagrid refuses, because Dumbledore has arranged for him to take Harry to the Dursleys at Privet Drive. The order is difficult to explain in that moment, yet Hagrid follows it with the loyalty that has always shaped his actions. Sirius stands among the broken stones while the wind moves over the garden, and the path between them becomes a boundary. The cottage offers no shelter now, only exposed beams, fallen plaster, and the lingering cold left by the rebounding curse. Raindrops strike the leaves with a soft, irregular patter, while mud gathers around the soles of Hagrid's boots. The child is wrapped closely against the weather, and only a small portion of his face remains visible above the coat. Sirius's voice carries across the garden, urgent but subdued, as though speaking loudly might disturb the dead. The old stone walls hold the smell of damp moss, rainwater, and earth turned by the night's disturbance. Hagrid looks down at Harry, then towards the road, where darkness stretches beyond the village into the sleeping countryside. For a little while, both men remain beneath the trees, surrounded by the wreckage of the house and the uncertain future beyond it. Then Hagrid leaves with Harry, and Sirius is left beside the ruins, watching the heavy footsteps recede along the garden path. The First Wizarding War effectively ends with Voldemort's disappearance, though no treaty is signed and no formal surrender is declared. For years, the conflict has moved through hidden rooms, guarded roads, frightened villages, and homes where people speak in lowered voices. Now the central figure of terror has lost his physical body, and the violence that followed him begins to fall quiet. The change is not announced by a trumpet, a proclamation, or an official gathering beneath a ceremonial roof. It travels instead through whispered reports, startled faces, hurried messages, and the sudden realization that Voldemort cannot be found. Mourning will bring confusion before certainty, and certainty before anyone can understand how a child has survived the killing curse. In Godric's Hollow, the ruined cottage stands beneath the final darkness, its open rooms exposed to rain and the fading warmth of the hearth. The air smells of wet ash and broken stone, with the faint metallic sharpness that often follows intense magical disturbance. A branch taps against the remaining window frame, repeating its quiet pattern until the wind turns it away. Water beads along the ivy and falls onto the garden wall, where moss softens the edges of old masonry. The village begins to pale at its eastern boundary, although the valley remains dark beneath the last heavy clouds of night. Far above the fields, the sky takes on a color between charcoal and blue, and the first birds stir within distant hedgerows. Hagrid continues across the West Country, carrying Harry towards the waiting road and the ordinary world beyond the hidden village. His footsteps remain steady, while the infant gradually grows quieter beneath the shelter of the great coat. The war has ended without anyone arranging the terms of peace, and the quiet feels fragile because its cause remains unknown. Harry becomes known throughout the wizarding world as the boy who lived, though the title begins before the truth can be understood. The public initially celebrates Harry without understanding the full circumstances of the attack or the sacrifice that has preserved him. People hear that Voldemort has vanished, that the child has survived, and that a lightning-shaped scar marks where the curse failed. They do not yet know that James Potter was killed first while trying to delay Voldemort without a wand in his hand. Nor do they know that Lily Potter was offered a chance to step aside and refused to abandon Harry. The first stories move faster than the facts, traveling from one magical household to another with excitement, relief, and incomplete knowledge. In distant streets, lamps burn late as witches and wizards exchange news, their voices softened by disbelief after years of fear. Some raise their glasses to Harry, while others speak Voldemort's name cautiously, as though the sound might summon him back. The celebration begins before the grief has been measured, because the public sees survival more easily than sacrifice. Across the country, night offices receive owls, shopkeepers hear rumors, and families gather around wireless sets, carrying uncertain reports. By dawn, Harry Potter is already becoming a figure of legend, although he remains only a tired infant in Hagrid's arms. The road beneath them is dark and wet, bordered by stone walls and fields where October grass bends beneath the rain. A pale mist rests in the hollows, flowing slowly around hedges and low gates as the night loses its deepest color. The smell of wet leaves rises from the verges, mingling with distant smoke from cottages where fires have been rekindled before sunrise. Hagrid's boots press deep marks into the soft ground, and the heavy rhythm of his footsteps continues through the sleeping countryside. Harry's blanket shifts whenever the giant moves, revealing the small curve of one cheek beneath its protective folds. Overhead, the clouds thin towards the east, exposing a faint wash of silver above the black outline of the hills. The West Country village remains behind them, hidden now by distance, darkness, and the turning bends of the road. Within the ruined cottage, the story of the night remains scattered among broken boards, fallen stones, and the dust of destroyed walls. No witness has seen the sacrifice clearly, and no account can yet explain why the killing curse returned to its caster. The protection created by Lily's sacrifice has settled around Harry in a form that no observer can immediately name. Much later, the rebounding curse will be understood to have destroyed the part of Voldemort's soul attached to Harry. That fragment has remained hidden inside the child, bound to him by the violence of the failed curse, and revealed only through later discoveries. For now, Harry's survival is known only as a mystery, and the lightning-shaped scar is the visible mark of an invisible protection. The night offers no answer to those who search the ruins, and the dead cannot explain the magic they have left behind. Rain continues falling through the open roof, washing dust from the stones and darkening the edges of the shattered floor. A small piece of blue fabric lies near the cot, dampened by water that has entered through the broken wall. The room smells of cold plaster, wet timber, and the faint sweetness of the blanket wrapped around the child before Hagrid arrived. Outside, the bare branches move against one another, producing a delicate wooden murmur above the garden. The first grey light gathers behind the churchyard, touching the upper stones, while the lower paths remain in shadow. A fox crosses the distant lane and disappears between two hedges, leaving the village once again without movement. Godric's hollow waits for morning, and the cottage waits with it, open to the weather and silent beneath the retreating dark. Hagrid reaches Privet Drive with Harry as night gives way to dawn, bringing the child to the place Dumbledore has selected. The address belongs to the Dursleys, whose ordinary suburban house stands far from the hidden villages and troubled histories of the wizarding world. Harry is delivered there because Dumbledore has arranged for him to live among his mother's relatives, protected by the old connection of blood. The decision carries no ceremony, and the infant arrives without the crowds already beginning to celebrate his name. Hagrid lowers Harry onto the doorstep at Privet Drive, leaving him with a letter and the protection surrounding the house. The transition from ruined cottage to quiet suburb is abrupt, yet the child remains unaware of both places and everything separating them. Behind him lie Godric's Hollow, the sacrifice, the green flash, and the silence after Voldemort's body has vanished. Ahead waits a house of closed curtains, polished surfaces, and a life that will begin without understanding the night. The dawn over the West Country village arrives slowly, spreading pale light across the roofs, churchyard, and wet garden stones. Mist lifts from the fields in thin layers, revealing hedges, lanes, and trees stripped nearly bare by autumn. Rainwater shines upon the road, where fallen leaves gather in rust-colored islands beside the walls. The cottage appears in the morning as a wound within the village, its broken rooms brightened by a weak, colorless sky. Soot clings to the stones, and damp plaster has fallen in soft heaps beneath the windows and along the garden path. A crow settles upon the highest remaining beam, shakes rain from its feathers, and watches the empty house without sound. Beyond the village, the fields begin to show their boundaries, while smoke rises gently from chimneys touched by the first daylight. The West Country air carries the smell of grass, rain, distant wood smoke, and earth cooling beneath the October morning. The public celebration grows through the day, even as the full truth remains scattered and unspoken among those closest to the war. The wizarding world calls Harry the boy who lived because Voldemort has disappeared, and the curse has failed to destroy him. Some believe the victory is simple, imagining that a powerful enemy has been defeated by a single act of unknown magic. Others sense deeper grief in the story, though they do not yet possess the names, choices, and moments that explain it. James Potter's death is remembered only gradually, and Lily Potter's sacrifice becomes clearer through later accounts and surviving memories. The public knows that Harry bears a scar, but it does not understand the protection that gave the scar its meaning. News travels through magical newspapers, whispered conversations, and gatherings where relief mingles with solemn recognition. The years of fear have ended for the moment, yet Voldemort's absence leaves a strange emptiness beside the joy. No one can say whether he is dead, hidden, weakened, or waiting somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary search. His disappearance becomes both an ending and a question, settling over the community like mist over fields. At Privet Drive, the morning is quiet and carefully arranged, with clipped hedges, clean pavements, and curtains drawn against the new day. The doorstep is cool beneath the infant's blanket, and the air carries none of the smoke or broken stone left in Godric's Hollow. A milk bottle waits near the letter, while the empty street holds only distant traffic and the faint call of a garden bird. The house beyond the door is warm, orderly, and unaware of the importance placed upon its threshold. Harry sleeps beneath the protection of Lily's sacrifice, though no one inside understands the magic surrounding him. The sound of Hagrid's departure has faded, leaving the street with its ordinary morning silence and pale autumn light. A thin breeze moves along the pavement, turning one dry leaf against the doorstep before carrying it towards the road. The world outside continues with its daily patterns, while the infant remains at the center of a history that has only begun. No herald announces the arrival of the boy who lived, and no formal witness records the exact hour of his new life. In Godric's Hollow, morning touches the ruined cottage more fully, revealing the damage left by the rebounding curse. The walls that once concealed the Potter home now stand broken beneath the sky, their protective charm unable to hide the evidence of violence. James and Lily remain within the house, and the silence around them is deeper than the silence of sleep. Harry's survival has separated the living from the dead, yet the connection between them continues through sacrifice, memory, and magic. The part of Voldemort's soul attached to Harry will remain undiscovered for many years, hidden beneath the ordinary signs of childhood. When that fragment is eventually destroyed, the meaning of the night will become more complete, though never less sorrowful. For now, the cottage holds only the immediate truth. A child has lived, 2 parents have fallen, and a tyrant has vanished. The wind returns through the bare branches, stirring leaves gathered against the garden wall. Cold air passes over the exposed beams and through the open rooms, carrying away the last warmth of the extinguished fire. Broken plaster lies beneath the windows like pale snow, while rainwater traces narrow lines down the darkened stones. The garden path remains marked by Hagrid's footsteps, each impression slowly filling with water as morning advances. A loose shutter knocks once against the wall, then rests when the wind changes direction. From the churchyard comes the distant sound of a bell, softened by mist and carried across the valley. The village begins to wake, though its inhabitants approach the cottage carefully, drawn by the unusual brightness and signs of destruction. Soon, voices will gather at the boundary, and questions will move from one doorway to another. For little longer, the ruined house remains alone beneath the dawn over the West Country village. The story of 31 October 1981 will pass from witness to witness, changing shape as it travels through the wizarding world. It will carry the names Godric's Hollow, James Potter, Lily Potter, and Harry Potter into conversations far from the broken cottage. Voldemort's name will be spoken with fear, then uncertainty, and eventually the cautious relief of those who have survived his reign. Harry will grow beneath the reputation of the boy who lived, while the true shape of Lily's sacrifice waits within his blood and memory. The public celebration will become legend before the facts have settled, and the legend will conceal as much as it reveals. Yet the essential truth will remain unchanged. Lily refused to abandon Harry, and her voluntary sacrifice created protection where none had been expected. The curse meant to end his life rebounded upon Voldemort, removing his physical body and ending his presence in the world. No treaty closes the first wizarding war, and no surrender is signed, but the long violence falls quiet with his disappearance. The quiet morning light spreads over the village, touching wet roofs, empty lanes, and leaves gathered beneath the trees. Mist hangs low beside the river, while distant hills appear and vanish behind shifting layers of pale vapor. The churchyard stones hold small beads of water, and the grass between them bends beneath the weight of the rain. A few blackbirds move through the hedges, their wings dark against the colorless sky, and their calls brief across the fields. The ruined cottage stands at the edge of the village with its rooms open, its garden disturbed, and its path slowly drying. No fire burns inside now, but a faint warmth lingers in the stones where the hearth softened the night. The air is clearer than before, carrying the scent of washed leaves and damp earth towards the houses below. Morning has arrived over Godric's Hollow, and with it comes the first day of a world that no longer knows where Voldemort is. The child at Privet Drive sleeps beneath a borrowed roof, while the wizarding world begins turning one terrible night into a story. Long before the complete truth is known, the tale will be repeated in shops, homes, schools, and quiet rooms beside winter fires. Its names will return often. Godric's Hollow, 31 October 1981, James and Lily Potter, and Harry, the boy who lived. The details will slowly gather around them, like frost forming along a window during a silent night. James bought only a few moments, yet those moments allowed Lily to choose the protection that changed everything. Lily died before Voldemort attacked Harry, and the curse he cast became the instrument of his own disappearance. Hagrid carried Harry from the wreckage. Sirius arrived too late to take him, and Dumbledore's plan led the child to the Dursleys. The war ended without ceremony, while a new legend began before sunrise. Across the West Country, dawn settles gently over fields and villages, and cold air moves through branches emptied of leaves. The sound of distant water follows the road, mingling with soft bird song and the faint movement of waking households. At Godric's Hollow, rain continues to fall from the eaves, though the storm has lost its earlier force. On Privet Drive, A small child sleeps beneath the protection of a mother who is no longer there to hold him. Between those two places lies the distance between death and survival, between an ending no one announced and a beginning no one understood. The night has passed, but its meaning will continue through every year that follows. Beneath the pale morning sky, the name Harry Potter moves quietly into history.